Okay.
Okay, you're live right now.
Okay, we are live. Thank you. Welcome to the special board meeting of September 29th, 2020 for the San Ramon Valley Unified School District. We want to let the public know that we are video recording this afternoon's board meeting. The recording is being live streamed on the district's YouTube channel, and a link to the recording has been posted to the district's website. I'd like to introduce my fellow board members. Ken Mintz, if you'll raise your hand.
Here.
Rachel Hurd. There we go. Susanna Ordway. Ken Mintz.
I'm still here.
I said Ken. I'm sorry. Mark Jewett. I don't see.
Hey, Greg, I'm here. I'm in the waiting room in Zoom. If you could check me in, or whoever does it.
Oh, well, it wouldn't be me that does it. So we'll let him in. He's a board member. Let him join the meeting. There we go. Mark Jewett, raise your hand. Oh, wait a minute. Waiting for your, there we go. Mark Jewett, and I'm Greg Marvel, president of the board. Thank you so much. We're going to report actions taken in closed session. There were no actions taken in closed session. If you'll join me, please, in the virtual Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance
To
to
the flag
of the
United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everybody. I need a motion for acceptance of the open session agenda, please.
So moved.
Okay, there's a motion and there is a second from Rachel. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. All right, we're on to 8.0 action items and public hearings. So we're on to 8.1, consideration adoption of the 2021 Learning Continuity Plan. So it looks like it's going to be John.
Thank you, President Marvel. All right, welcome. Thank you for letting me take a few minutes to discuss learning continuity and attendance plan. And thank you, Trustee Hurd and Trustee Ordway, for joining us in our meetings. As you know, last spring, we turned in a COVID-19 accountability plan to look at how we were adjusting to the COVID experience. This year, instead of the traditional LCAP process, we are turning in an update on how we are providing services in our COVID remote learning environment. So we had 2 engaging stakeholder meetings with over 50 parents, students, staff, and the trustees, and we were able to get meaningful input and looking forward to how we are serving our students during this time. The local control accountability plan, I could have you go to the next one, please. Which this year we're going into the learning of how we are providing these services. How are we addressing gaps in learning? What have we done to identify and address those gaps? What are we doing to address the needs of our unduplicated students with unique needs and students experiencing homelessness? We have done an incredible job providing access to devices and connectivity and hotspots. And as a district, we have distributed thousands of such devices and hotspots. How are we providing resources and supports to address student and staff mental health and the social emotional well-being? And we've continued to provide meal services to our students. As we did in the spring, we continue to do so now. So thank you. The continuity and attendance plan is broken into 4 categories. The first is in-person instructional offerings. What will we do when we return to school? And how we will provide increased health and safety measures. How we will support our vulnerable students. And when data indicates that it's safe for schools to reopen, our district will offer a hybrid model, continue with a complete remote learning option, which we'll hear more of tonight. So this plan requires us to share some of our ideas as a district in each of these categories. Our next category is distance learning program and how we have developed technology in order to successfully, and we've done a great job this fall with our remote learning programs, devices for students and staff, software, curriculum, professional development, thousands of hours of professional development to create a robust and rigorous distance learning program that is meeting the needs of our students. The third section of this plan is how we're going to address pupil learning loss. And this has been a huge district initiative for years, by name, by need, identify what our students need to be proficient at all levels. And so we have purchased curriculum and digital materials, FastBridge being one of them, to assess where our students are, what the gaps are, and what we need to do to address those gaps so students can become proficient in core essential skills. We've additionally planned and provided support for our English learners and through their literary intervention periods. And finally, the last section of this plan that is submitted to the county is what are we doing to support the mental health and social emotional well-being of our students and staff. And as you know, we have a robust student service department with 6 social workers. In the last 2 years, we have gone from 1 social worker as a district to 6. Those social workers provide wraparound services. They provide transportation access. They provide clothing, possible additional food requirements, access to counselors in and out of our district. Our social workers, combined with our school psychologists and counselors, have partnered with our sites to provide that student social emotional well-being. In addition, the amazing Discovery Center here locally provides additional counseling services for our students. And we continue to provide the one-on-one and small group counseling remotely for our students. So the LCP, the next steps in the LCP, it's a checkpoint. We expect more to come from the state to, like last spring, address how are we doing. If we move into a hybrid, how do we know hybrid is working successfully? So our schools each have site plans that must align with this LCP. We'll continue to measure student progress. We'll continue to have stakeholder feedback groups as we move forward to better understand how we are doing with our development of our learning continuity and attendance plan. So that's very brief, I know, but I wanted to give you just an overview. This is posted on our website. It goes into much more detail, but we have completed all forms. Our county has already reviewed and given us feedback, which we've incorporated. Our trustees and our other participants of our stakeholder meetings gave us great insight. So I just wanted to give a brief overview of that. Thank you. And are there any questions?
Ken.
Yeah, John, I've got one quick question. So I appreciate the work that's gone on to put the plan together. I just wonder, after the first month of school here, do we have any feedback, particularly on the last item on social and emotional work and how our counselors are doing? Are students being able to actively request and receive support?
Thanks, Trustee Mintz. Great question. We've actually spoken with our counselors that they, from their perspective, and we don't have, I was talking to Trustee Jewett before the meeting, the students that we've spoken to feel they have access. And our counselors have said something unique, Mr. Mintz, which is they have seen an increase in students feeling comfortable sharing information remotely, whereas they might not have felt comfortable leaving class or leaving lunch to go into the counseling office. So we've seen an increase of those services. And our counselors, as I said at a July board meeting, they do incredible work. And in the past 2 years, we've increased the number of counselors, increased the number of social workers, and that's come from our mental, health task force. And so we're seeing that, but we are worried about, every kid. And so we are trying to actively identify students through attendance and through engagement to make sure that if they need extra help, we are reaching out to them. And I personally have seen our social workers in the past 2 weeks do home visits, following COVID requirements, and check in with students, and it is powerful. I've witnessed it personally, and we need you at school remotely. We need you engaged. So we feel it's there, and we feel there's more to do, and we meet every 3 weeks to 4 weeks with our counselors to discuss next steps.
Thank you.
Same question. Just diving a little bit deeper into social emotional, the 6 social workers we have, any feedback on their capacity, how well they're being engaged by our student community, and just overall workload?
Thank you, Mr. Jewett. They work out of it's a joint partnership with Ken Nelson, our director of student services, and Amy Capura, our assistant director of special education, and they are meeting the needs of students all the time. So they are busy. At the beginning of the year, Mr. Jewett, was getting supplies, getting transportation if necessary, et cetera. Now it's about this engagement in school. And so I don't have the exact details of the number of visits, et cetera, but it is nonstop. Our sites have become, and when this first started, one of the things that we did really well as a district is make sure our sites know how to connect with social workers, families know how to connect. And so, other than like the data where I shared some of these home visits and the phone calls, we see them engaging. But again, until we have every kid, we're not satisfied. Thank you. You're welcome.
Any other board member questions? I'd like to point out that we've made I think you guys alluded to it, we've had a significant increase in the last few years of mental health support here within the district, and our closer working relationship with the Discovery Counseling Center. I want to also point that out. Some of the things I've seen from parents is that, you know, we need more mental health, and we heard you several years ago, and we've increased our resources in mental health dramatically. So I think just wanted to point that out. From 1 to 6 social workers is a huge commitment financially, and hopefully it's going to prove to be a very positive commitment of resources. Any other questions or comments? All right, are there any comments that we received on this topic?
Yes, there was one. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was not this one.
Okay, so we're going to vote on this then, if there's no more comments, and then I'm going to go back to comments for non-agenda items, which I missed, and I apologize. All right, so I need an action item on 8.1, consideration of adoption of the 2021 Learning Continuity Plan. Is there a motion? Susanna has made a motion. Is there? And Rachel Hurd has made the second. Any further comments or questions? Hearing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion carries unanimously. So before I go on to 8.2, I'd like to go back to public comment on non-agenda items. Do we have any public comments on non-agenda items?
Yes, we do have one.
Okay.
Non-agenda item comment came from Marcelo Varela. And the comment is, Dear Superintendent Dr. Malloy and board members, I would like to express my gratitude for the monumental efforts of educating our students in a fully remote learning model during this public health crisis. As the district works towards beginning in-person learning for students with acute needs and/or elementary students, negotiations between the district and labor unions have resumed. I would like to provide input about 3 topics regarding the health and safety of staff and students for your consideration. 1, I appreciate that the CSEA's current MOU ensures reasonable accommodations for individuals at high risk with severe outcomes for COVID-19. The California Department of Public Health's guidance for schools and school-based programs, which the district has agreed to follow, suggests also supporting employees who cannot safely distance from household contacts at higher risk. The language in the memorandum's accommodation section omits any mention of staff with high household members. Please explicitly include this category of employees when addenda or agreements are finalized with all labor unions to align with the recommendations of the CDPA, and so that staff in high-risk households will not be forced to choose between their livelihoods and their lives. 2, I am thankful to see that CSE MOU commits to follow governmental orders and guidelines of various health agencies, and that, quote, where these guidelines and regulations are not in agreement, the district still shall adhere to the more restrictive applicable guidelines and regulations, end quote. This suggests a thoughtful approach to safety. However, this is contradicted by the memorandum's listing of face shields as permissible as a substitute to cloth face coverings. Currently, the CDC does not recommend the use of gaiters or face shields. Evaluation of these face covers is ongoing, but effectiveness is unknown at this time. A clear mask is suggested to CDC as an adaptation in special circumstances, for example, for people who are deaf or hard of hearing, or who will need to communicate with someone who is. In a teaching capacity, this may also be applicable to speech and language pathologist roles and related speech services providers. Face shields with a cloth drape secured at the bottom that the MOU references are, according to the CDE, intended for those who are unable to wear face coverings for medical reasons. I strongly urge the district to allow face shields as an acceptable substitute for cloth face coverings only for those who medically verified exemptions, and to commit to this limitation in writing. To not do so would be to ignore the most up-to-date CDE and CDC recommendations. 3, in listening closely to past board meetings about beginning in-person instruction, it seems that the narrative advertises or always presumes face coverings for all staff and students, as well as physical distancing. But in practice, it would be different, at least for some. I would be grateful to learn how exactly the district plans to ensure staff and student safety in the very real scenarios in which adhering to these measures is not likely. For example, for when young students or students with special needs who may not tolerate face coverings, or who require physical prompting as a critical teaching component, or physical assistance for toileting and hygiene needs. Staff who are in such compromised positions deserve meaningful answers and additional measures above and beyond extra PPE. Please commit to initial and regular COVID testing, at least for this relatively small subset of staff and students. Before the district asks for declarations to be made and set in stone, please be explicit in disclosures to families who may place children in special education or other classrooms where educators cannot always follow physical distancing requirements, or peers may not always follow face covering guidelines, even if their own child would. I want to thank you for being open to feedback from all stakeholders. For when in-person instruction resumes, my hope is that the district and board members reconsider some decisions within CSEA's MOU to align more closely with scientifically validated governmental guidelines. I also hope to hear more about how the district plans to ensure the health and safety of staff and students in special circumstances in which face coverings and physical distancing mandates cannot always be followed. With respect and gratitude.
Thank you. For the audience, items that are not for comment that are non-agenda, we cannot have a dialogue. We can't comment back and forth about it or enter into a discussion. So what I'm going to ask staff to do is please get in touch with this individual and get more information. I'm assuming that'd be Danny and Keith, because it's both safety issues and it's negotiations issues. If you'll get in touch with this individual so that we have a better understanding of exactly what the issues are so they can be appropriately addressed. Okay, we're on to 8.2, San Ramon Valley Unified School District's path to reopening schools. Dr. Malloy, I'm assuming?
Yes, President Marvel, we're just bringing the presentation up. Thank you very much. I look forward to sharing with the board and with our community important information regarding our way forward. I'm just going to move the slides there. Thank you. So we will cover this evening is a bit of an introduction and a context, feedback about remote learning, which we promised to bring back to this meeting, stakeholder feedback on reopening, and then an actual plan for your consideration. I want to remind us that there are some foundational principles that continue to govern our work, and anytime we're dealing with these exceptionally complex matters, we go back to them. And health and safety of students and staff remains our top priority. I'm conscious of the fact that people may hold different definitions for what this means. When I speak publicly, which I've done quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, there is something I bring into all of my discussions, which are that our families, our community has different relationships or perceptions or experiences with the pandemic. But we are doing our very best to ensure that any decisions we make keep all students and staff safe. High quality instruction remains our goal, realizing again that each learner is different and that their engagement with whether it's remote or future hybrid is not necessarily always what works for each and every student, but please note that that becomes the foundation of our discussion. We continue to wish to provide and plan to provide options. There aren't multiple options because each option adds a complexity that I'll speak to this afternoon, but certainly options remain important and significant. You'll hear tonight, or excuse me, this afternoon, that stakeholder feedback has informed what you will see in front of you, and I'll outline how significant that has been. You might recall that at our last meeting, when we were speaking about potential scenarios to reopen. I was very clear about the fact that the work that needed to be done before we came to you this afternoon was very much connected to this notion of engaging all stakeholders, and then of course collaborating and negotiating with all bargaining units, which is this next principle. And of course, we will follow all statutes and guidance, and I hope to clarify a little bit of this as well. It goes without saying that this is probably one of the most complex issues that any of us has ever dealt with. I have suggested that no matter how long one has been in the field of education, or has parented children, or has been a board member, we've never seen anything like this, at least in this generation. And because of that, I think it adds a dimension of complexity to everything that we do. I'm starting there because I think it's important that I be exceptionally direct and candid, that as we provide this information this evening, some may be quite excited by what they hear, others may be quite upset. Unfortunately, not our intent for this to be a win-lose situation. I can't control that. We're trying to make our decisions based upon foundational guidance, foundational principles, but I trust and understand that what we have to walk through this evening will be received in very, very different ways by our community, who holds very, very different perspectives, and we're going to speak to that. I'll use a simple example to say on any given evening where I have not exaggerating that there might be 200 emails, the absolute passion that is communicated regarding what we should do next is clear. I can receive that passion as the superintendent because I understand where it's coming from. A love and a care for children, for your children, and I get that. The challenge seat, now I'm going to share this with the board for your seat, is that that passion unfortunately doesn't align. And that's where hard decisions need to make regarding what needs to come next. There seems to be some confusion from some of the information I've received regarding the requirements as we move to the red. You would have heard probably, if not, I'll share that we moved officially to the red tier today. And that movement from the red tier, though, it allows us to open without a waiver. It does still require the same adherence to those same guiding principles that you've been hearing us speak about for quite some time. So issues around masking, around physical distancing, around cohorting, around hygiene and cleaning, around contact tracing and testing, though different in this red tier, because we do not need to test in the same very specific way of 25% of our staff every 2 weeks. There still is an expectation that we engage in testing and tracing so as to avoid any outbreak in our community. These things are very important for us to share with you as we go forward, because even though the documents, the guidance from the state, the documents from the county are being interpreted in many different ways from our public who have shared their insights with me, I will be providing to you not my own interpretation, but actually the clarity that I have received that may or may not find itself in the written documents that you are reading yourselves. Some have asked why hybrid? Why would we not be able to return to 5 days a week, full-time instruction? Why was that not one of the options on the survey? And the answer to that is twofold. One, we must adhere to 4 to 6 feet physical distancing. And it's not just in the room itself. It's expected in the hallways. It's expected as students enter and leave the classroom itself, entering and leaving the school itself. Fortunately, our properties are large enough that we can certainly use the outdoors, but we are expected to adhere to that. And though the documents say 4 to 6 feet, I'm simply going to report that in every meeting that I've been in, again, this is a statement that you may or may not agree with, they would like us to move more towards the 6 feet, especially for kids 10 and older, not because it's written, 4 would be okay, but again, the job of the board now is to provide oversight for this important commitment to safety, because the whole purpose of the distancing is the notion of the droplets and how far those droplets could potentially move and that's where that comes from, and that must still be followed. Cohorting, even though it does say 16 individuals where practicable, which means that you could potentially have one teacher in 2 cohorts or potentially a few more students in the class, it doesn't mean 28 students. And I'm saying it that directly because I have been asked why we are defining the cohort data as we are. Where practical still means that to provide that safety, that it's required, it's just not as rigid as it was when we were in purple. The next point is probably the most important one, and I'm going to try to state it in the most clear way possible, because yes, we want to offer choice. And in the last meeting, I did explain, I wasn't here at the time, but my team explained it to me, and I certainly respect it and understand it, that a choice was not asked of you in a declaration sort of way in July. Declaration meaning that you would then be bound to that decision for the rest of the year, because the data in July is very different than we have now. And truthfully, we may not know what the data will bring us in January or in March or next June for that matter. So at some point, a decision needs to be made, and what it could cause is interruption. Why? Let's go back to the topic of hybrid. We are working very closely with our employee groups. We are listening very closely to our students and to our families. We understand that minimizing interruptions to schedules, interruptions to teacher assignments, because our kids have developed great relationships with our teachers, which is an amazing problem to have. I love that that has been the 100% perspective. It's important to note that when the decision is made to move towards hybrid, or when the decision is made for those families who wish to remain remote, there will be potentially some interruption for this reason. We have to staff our classrooms based upon the numbers of children in them. That is a budget reality that we cannot ignore. If by chance all the students in a classroom wanted something similar, it might be easy to minimize those disruptions. If a class of 30, 15 wanted one thing and 15 wanted another in terms of hybrid or remote, that again allows us to provide some very creative scenarios. If 5 children in third grade in a school want remote or hybrid, for example, we can't staff a classroom of 5. So when I've heard the very challenging emails about, will you move me to another school? Will you move me to another class? Though we will do everything in our power not to do that, I'm simply putting out there the absolute facts that we are contending with, so that there is no surprise depending upon when that declaration happens and when decisions are made, how it is that it could proceed. But having said that, let me go back to my original point. We hear and understand the desire not to cause interruptions to the best of our ability. We are engaging in creative dialogues. Those dialogues are not finished yet, and we're hoping to get to a better place with that. You're hearing the worst case scenario because I'm wanting you to understand it, but you're also hearing a best case scenario, which means this process of trying to figure out a way forward that helps all students succeed still has a lot of potential. The waiver process, we did receive word from the county, even though I know we've moved into red, but I want to continue to honor the commitment that I've made to you as a board regarding that process, is there were 2 concerns with our application, which is why our application was not accepted. The one is related to what I was able to state with you or to you publicly around our definition of a cohort, which did not meet the waiver requirement, which stated that in purple you could only have 1 teacher with a cohort. You could not have a teacher teaching 2 cohorts, something that we shared with you last meeting, and that was illuminated as a problem in our plan. The second issue, which is actually not a problem, it just means that though we have worked out vendor relationships, and I'm going to leave it at that, related to testing, We haven't signed contracts yet because clearly there are financial realities associated with that. And it's something that we could easily do should we have been approved. It's just that we weren't approved. We didn't sign because we're not spending the money when there's no reason to spend it. So that was noted as it's a requirement to be under contract with a vendor when you're in purple. We could have been, and they know that. So I really think the big issue is the cohorting definition as I have shared it with you. In terms of this context, which I'll be passing this very shortly to my colleagues, I've started with this introduction with the notion of the complexity and the challenge. And I do believe that we have the ability to get to a good place. I do understand that the good place will have a rocky path in light of all of the very strong and real experiences people are having. I want to state to the board that we have been working as fast and as furiously and as effectively as we can to bring these proposals to you. And if we can turn to the next slide, I think I need your help, Greg. Just to be clear about what you'll be hearing tonight, we'll speak to the thought exchange suggestions that are bringing about a change to our remote schedule, which was asked for previously. We will provide you an analysis of the survey data that was collected over the last week. We will provide a brief update regarding negotiations. We've actually invited some members of our stakeholder groups. I went to the stakeholder groups the first day and I said, there was a question about what kind of authority that they have. And I said, though I never take away the authority of the board to make its decisions, that I would give them the authority to really provide great recommendations. I would go to them if I had an issue with their recommendations. And in light of that model of leadership that we've communicated there, some of those members are actually going to be here to share aspects of their work. So you're not just hearing from me or from the district team. And lastly, you'll hear also about the professional perspectives that we as your district staff wish to offer based upon the collaboration that has happened. In terms of the work to date, we have worked on remote learning, special education, the survey, the collaborative working groups, operational issues and safety issues, and of course the planning guide, which is already published and is continuously updated. The questions from our families are exceptionally important because we actually are focusing on using that guide in an evolving fashion. And now I'm going to turn this over to Assistant Superintendent Christine Huardo to speak a little bit about what we learned related to thought exchange and remote learning.
Thank you, Dr. Malloy. I wanted to talk a little bit about our remote learning update. At our last board meeting, we spoke about the common themes that were the highest rated thoughts from our thought exchange. And just to remind everyone, the 4 highest rated thoughts that we were tasked to go back and reflect upon within our schedules was a common lunch, balance of screen time, allowing for more breaks, and for more one-to-one peer interactions. After carefully taking that feedback to heart and working collaboratively with our union groups, we took on relooking at our remote schedules. While we were able to provide some of the solutions that I shared above to some of the common rated thoughts, an example of one that we were able to resolve is we were able to look at schedules and develop a common lunch, which was highly voiced across our parent, staff, and student population. An example of one we were not able to do was to create more time that was built into the schedule where we could have more one-to-one peer-directed interaction. That being said, I have 2 of my colleagues here with me today to present our revised remote schedules. I do want to note that while these schedules have been tentatively agreed upon with SRVUSD, our teachers' negotiations, they are still in the process of being ratified by their unit members. I do want to take a moment, though, to turn it over to John Campo-Piano and Nadine Rosenzweig to take us through the highlights of those schedules so that we can talk a little bit more in depth around the changes that were made. We're going to go ahead and start with elementary, and I'm going to turn it over to Nadine Rosenzweig to talk about the highlights within the elementary revised remote schedule.
Thank you, Christine. Hi, everyone. So as we looked at the remote schedule, and we did have a committee looking at this. We were able to have lunch align with the middle and high school schedules. We were able to provide a longer lunch time for the elementary school students, specifically in grades 1 through 5. And in the 1st through 5th grade schedule, the start time is 5 minutes later. So this way it was able to support the alignment with lunch. And then if you want to go to the next slide. So this is our pre-K, TK, transitional kindergarten and kindergarten schedules. So their Monday common learning time shows their learning in the morning, 8 to 11. They would have their lunch 8 to 11:30, and then the assignment completion is 11:30 to noon. On the regular schedule days of Tuesday through Friday, again, their learning time is the 8 to 11. They would have the common lunch, 11 to 11:30, and then go into their student support and then assignment completion. Our preschool TK kindergarten students don't usually have lunch, so the lunchtime built in there is the 30-minute, and it can go over to an additional time. If I can get the next slide to share about the 1st through 5th grade. So 1st through 5th grade remote has a starting time 5 minutes later at 8:05. And the lunch learning time continues, and lunch on the Monday is 11 to 11:30, but on Tuesday through Friday, lunch would be 11 to 11:40, which aligns with the secondary schedule. And then you can see we move down the rest of the learning time, and the student support is at the end of the day. So that is your elementary, and the one-to-one peer support is happening in the learning blocks where teachers are using small group time and some peer interaction. So I will turn it over to John Campopiano to take us through the secondary.
Thanks so much. And I wanted to give a special shout out to the collaborative group that worked on this. We had a small group. Thank you to the serving members. You know who you are, who helped develop this middle school schedule and the high school coming up in partnership with our negotiating team. So thank you. Our lunches are aligned at 11 o'clock with elementary and high school, which is a main criteria that came out of Thought Exchange. So 11 o'clock. So in middle school, it is earlier in the day, and start time Monday through Friday is 8:20, which allows us to align these lunches. If we go to the next slide, please. The next slide shows the start time Monday through Friday at 8:20. It shows the lunch time Tuesday through Friday at 11 o'clock. Those days are aligned. The Monday is slightly different because of the common learning day, but Tuesday through Friday, lunches will be at 11 o'clock. And the student support stays at 30 minutes, which we receive very positive feedback from students and staff. Thank you for that time to provide extra time and support like we spoke of earlier to meet the needs of all of our students during this time. So the middle school schedule, the lunch is bumped up. Start time is changed to 8:20 throughout the week. And we have aligned lunches, which we're excited about. If we could move to high school. And thank you for the same, or different group of people, but the same thank you for the collaboration. Class periods at high school were reduced from 85 to 80 minutes. And a key to that is we were able to keep student support at 35 minutes to give that extra time and support for our students, which they have been incredibly grateful of their staff for that extra time and help. So you'll see a 5-minute reduction in class periods to 80 minutes. Passing periods have extended to 10 minutes, which is another thing that came up from our students and through Thought Exchange and other groups to increase that passing period to 10 minutes. Again, lunches are aligned Tuesday through Friday at 11. Lunch is early high school level like it is in middle school. And the A period will start at 8:20, which allows alignment. And then first period will start after. If we could pop to the next slide, please. Thank you. And this shows, and again, will be found on our website. And this schedule will start on October 12th, but that'll come up as well as we go. 8:20 start time for A period. And not all students take A period, as those of you in high school know. And we have lunch at 11:05, Tuesday through Friday at the high school, the 35-minute student support, and the increase of passing. This is all reflected in here. for all students and staff. So really collaborative process. Thank you for all the parents, students, and staff that gave us feedback on it. And you can jump to the next slide, please. And finally, adult transition. I put this in here, we put this in here. There's no change, but we wanted to make sure, since there was changes in others, there are no changes at Del Amigo, the adult transition, but we wanted to mention that, put it in there, and it will stay on the website. Thank you. And the next slide. And finally, I'll pass it over to Mr. Hillman.
Thanks, John. So much like the process that we used for all of the tweaks to the bell schedules that Mr. Campopiano just went through, we wanted to get thoughts. We talked to the community via Thought Exchange. We got their feedback. We were able to make some tweaks. For the next pieces, we didn't use Thought Exchange. We use a more traditional survey. We wanted to gauge what people were thinking. We tried really to be very diligent about the fact that this was not a declaration. This was simply trying to get some feedback from our families about what it is that they'd like to see as of right now, knowing what they know, and then also give them an opportunity if they aren't feeling confident one particular choice about a hybrid model or staying remote for the rest of the year, that they could tell us that they were unsure and then ask for some additional details. So we don't have all of the information here in the presentation, but what we wanted to do was summarize a couple of the results in a couple of slides. So the family survey results come out like this. We broke down the two pie graphs into elementary and secondary. There are some slight differences there, but I think that you can see from the grand total in the table that we have about just above 30%, so 31.76% that would prefer that their child return to in-person hybrid learning as soon as possible. And that we have just below 30% at 29.9% prefer that their child learns remotely for the remainder of this school year. And then the next big category was in yellow, you can see it there, that they would prefer their child to return in hybrid, but they'd like to wait until January, and they'd like to make a choice in November. So basically make a choice in about a month or so. And then we still had some people that were unsure, around 7.8%. And then we also had some people that said they didn't really care very much whether or not it was hybrid or in person. They were just more interested in their child being able to stay connected to their teacher, and we assume for things like routine, and for a social emotional connection, and just the comfort level that they have with the adult that they've made a relationship with since the beginning of this school year. So this is how it breaks down by elementary and secondary. You can see the grand total. The next slide, if you could go to that. We asked a similar question of our staff members because we wanted to do the same thing, gauge what their thinking was at this time, and also give an opportunity for those that were unsure to tell us why they were unsure. So the highest number here on this particular survey for our staff members, this includes our teaching staff, our classified staff, which would be our office people, our child nutrition workers, our bus drivers, all of our staff members were surveyed. And we received about 76%, I believe, or something close to that, of all of our, 73% of all of our staff replied. And so here's how it shook down. The highest number at 42%, just over that, would prefer that students learn remotely for the rest of the school year. Next highest number at 20%, almost 20.7%, would prefer that students come back in a hybrid setting, but wait till January to do so. And then the third highest number was return as soon as possible. That was 11.8%. And then we also had a hybrid model, but to do it, to keep their teacher for the rest of the school year, regardless if it was hybrid or not, was 14.4. That was actually the third highest, so I apologize. And I forgot to mention it on the previous slide, I apologize. For families, we received about 16,600 verified respondents to the survey where we could go through. They gave a student number, we know who they are. And so we were able to make sure that we didn't have duplicates and things like that. We spent quite a bit of time to make sure that those numbers were solid and accurate before compiling some of these summaries. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Deb Pettish, who's going to go through some of the other things that we've been doing in the last 2 weeks to make sure that we were getting additional voices and their concerns to the table.
Thank you so much, Danny, and good afternoon, trustees. So in addition to collecting the quantitative survey data that Danny just explained, we really also wanted to talk to the people who would be most impacted by the decisions that we made over the next few weeks. So in other words, we really wanted to better understand the story behind the data, the story behind the survey numbers, right? So what we did was we first created what we called a collaborative working group. And so this group was really internal staff members. We had classified individuals such as office managers, certificated staff such as teachers and counselors. We had site administrators and district administrators. And really the point of this group was to continue to and really deepen our discussions around best practices with regard to reopening in a hybrid environment. So to not only talk about it, to continue the discussions and really deepen them. So we met several times last week over many, many hours, as they can attest. And eventually some themes began to emerge. So we also met with several what we're calling advisory committees. So one group was parents who represented each school site. They were parents who were already on the site council. And we pretty much had representation from every single site. And that is in addition to several individuals who were representing the needs of our special education population. So at our parent advisory committee, we also had a student advisory committee, and we separated those into two. So we met with one group of fifth graders, one from every elementary, and then another group of students who represented our secondary, both middle school and high school. And that was definitely the highlight of my week, working with the students. They were absolutely amazing. So some themes again started to emerge, and we also shared these themes with many of our bargaining unit members outside the collaborative working group. So then on Thursday, we had several different stakeholders, or really all the stakeholders who had been meeting throughout the week. We all came together on Thursday afternoon for a couple of hours. There was about 85 people. And we talked about these themes that were emerging. And I think to us, really the beauty of that was, you know, often parents talk to parents, or students talk to students, or staff talks to staff. And really this was an opportunity for us to really foster those cross collaborative discussions. And so we had in that group of 85, we broke them off into smaller groups that had parents, student, classified, certificated, site admin, district admin. So it was really, really wonderful discussions. And what we focused on, excuse me, during those discussions were really the themes that emerged. And the goal was not to get consensus around the themes, although if that would have happened, that would have been amazing. But that really wasn't the goal. The goal was really to promote productive discussions across all of these groups about the themes, so we could better understand, again, the story behind the numbers. How were people really feeling about hybrid reopening? And how can we then take that understanding back, take that into consideration when we make our decisions over the next few weeks. And really, how can we support the board in understanding where these particular stakeholders are coming from, so they can make their very important decisions over the next couple of weeks as well. So I'm so excited to say that I am not going to share the themes with you. I actually have 4 different representatives from our stakeholder groups who are going to share some of the themes that emerged. And they're going to talk a little bit about the theme, but also the discussions that we had around the theme, whether there was general consensus or not, and some of the nuances involved in those particular discussions. So I feel so fortunate right now to turn it over to Doherty Valley student Jose Sarmiento, who is just simply an amazing kid, to talk about our first 2 themes.
Good afternoon. My name is Jose Sarmiento. I'm a senior at Doherty Valley High School, and I'm the ASB president. So now the first emerging thing that we talked about was that safety should be at the forefront of discussions and must inform all of the decisions that we make. Now, the general consensus was in agreement. However, there were some concerns regarding what guidelines we will actually be following, whether that be CDC or something of the sort. But the overall idea is that a concrete plan needs to be decided on with no confusion as to the steps and the procedures of actually implementing a hybrid schedule. However, a very important note that this plan should be spread through a direct line of communication. And I want to emphasize this because it should be a direct line of communication to teachers and parents, but most importantly to students, because as I know directly being a student, we are the ones who need the most reinforcement in terms of actually following the procedures and just knowing when things are happening in the district. I can say firsthand that a lot of the time it feels as though students are on the back burner of the district chain of information, despite the fact that us, along with teachers, are the ones who are the most affected by the information itself. So any direct communication with us, maybe weekly video updates that are emailed to our respective SRVUSD emails would be very appreciated for students in terms of knowing what's going on. Now, the second point there is emerging theme number 4, which is moving to a hybrid environment poses a variety of challenges that still need to be addressed. Moving to a hybrid environment in October does not seem like a realistic timeframe to address these challenges. Now, we had a consensus of semi-agreement here, with the main issue from the stakeholders was that they did not know what the asynchronous time will look like in a hybrid model and what the day will look like for the students in terms of their schedule. The general idea, however, was that they need more time to sort this out. So in moving into a hybrid environment in October does not seem like a realistic time frame. Besides these main issues of the asynchronous time schedule, though, most agreed that October is just too early to start a hybrid learning. And some, like myself, emphasize the idea that changes in a student's schedule will not only take a long time to make, but should also be done at the optimum time. Obviously, by changing a student's schedule halfway through the first semester or 3/4 of the way through their first semester, it'd be very confusing, especially for juniors and seniors in high school, but it also just would not be conducive of a consistent learning environment. Teachers have very different styles of teaching, and changing that at such an inopportune time could be very detrimental to a student's education. And again, on this point, I just want to emphasize the longer time period between now and the commencement of hybrid learning would also allow for the establishing of a direct line of communication with students, like I mentioned with the first emerging theme. Asking for some of their input or what questions they have regarding the general vision of what hybrid learning will look like in SRVUSD. It should not be that students sometimes feel like less of a priority than any other staff member or administrator on their campus in regards to district communication. As a student who was given this opportunity right now to speak here, I think more opportunities like this where students get to talk directly to you would be beneficial for both parties, especially when student opinions tend to differ so drastically from their parents'. So that is all. Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Victoria.
Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria Felix, and I'm the office manager at Stone Valley Middle School. The emerging theme number 2, the district needs to support the community in understanding what a hybrid environment looks like. We are all in agreement on this emerging theme. There still are a lot of unanswered questions about asynchronous in particular. The group felt that they did not want to return to spring, where there is not any structure to the days. Parents, students, teachers, and staff want total clarity on the return to school. Students and teachers currently have a lot of virtual face-to-face time. Will this still be the case? And the next theme, number 5, transition to a hybrid model using a phased-in approach with small groups. This may serve as a pilot model for a full service or full-scale hybrid instruction. We were all in semi-agreement on this topic. Using some type of transitional model or pilot program would allow each school to slowly transition back to in-person learning. The idea to bring back the groups who need it the most first. Small groups don't have to focus on learning. They could focus on the social emotional piece. For example, bring students back for social interactions and not just learning. Thank you. And next I'll hand it over to Ann Katzberg.
Well, thank you, Victoria and Jose. It's so nice to spend this space with you today. And as I did in working with all of you, and also our parent that's going to be speaking following me is Bridget. It was just a really wonderful experience. I'm Ann Katzberg, and I am the president of SRVUSD, representing our certificated staff. And I wanted to give a shout out to management, because when I first heard about the fact that we were going to be meeting so often in these last 2 weeks, I thought it was going to be really difficult, but actually it was an amazing experience. And our survey members that participated, they were really amazing representatives and did a great job in contributing to the voice of all of our members in the discussion. So when we came up with the themes, I want the board to know that I did share this with all of our members via our site leaders, and I got feedback from them prior to the meeting on Thursday. We were able to discuss this with the entire stakeholder group. And when we got together with our stakeholder group, we were broken up into groups of 10, and I was with parents, student Jose, as well as management. And what was really astonishing to me is just the depth of the discussion and how valuable it was for me just to hear the voices of everybody. So I'm glad that we can look at these themes as a matter of where we're going to move forward. And listening to Jose and Victoria, I started to think that there's a lot of overlapping. So I am talking about our first theme here, which is students TK through 12 should not fully go back to school until the second semester at earliest. And I want to let you know how this transpired. At first, we thought that it would be best for our secondary students because of the confusion it would cause to send back our students in October, because it would disrupt the grading process, it would disrupt the coursework, and it would be really problematic and difficult for scheduling, just seemed to be really difficult. But what came out of that is that it was true also for elementary. What has been talked about earlier is the relationship with our educators. And by throwing in a really quick, let's go back to hybrid right now in October, would just be devastating to a lot of our teachers and to our students too. And to the families, people really do want to stay with their teachers. So we want to make sure we don't build the plane as we are flying it. It's going to take time to make sure that we bring in all of the considerations as we look at transitioning to a hybrid. So one predominant sentiment that stood out for me in our discussion came from one parent, and she said that we really need a plan. We need a plan that's going to structure this shift that we are envisioning. And because we don't have a really clear plan on all of the complexities yet, opening in October is very premature. So we need to take time to devise this plan. And so the other theme that I'm going to be speaking about is the hybrid model should be AM, PM at the elementary level and block at the secondary level. And the first theme that I talked about was pretty unified. This one, not as much, because what happened is the rationale behind going to an AM, PM rather than 2 days together here, 2 days together there at the elementary level is because it's important for our students to have a lot of consistency, a lot of repetition, to see their teachers. And so just being in that contact every day with a teacher, at least 4 days a week, would benefit many, many of our students, particularly our younger students, because we want to make sure that we address the needs of our students in a remote in a hybrid universe, and that's difficult. And we've heard about the difficulties learning remotely for many, many of our students. However, there's going to be complications about an AM PM that I want to bring up and for your consideration. And that is cleaning in between the AM and the PM periods. Also scheduling our specialists at the elementary level, who are our prep teachers, and also the toll it's going to take on our parent community just to transport daily the students to the classroom. And that's never easy when you are doing pickup and drop off in any day. You've been in those lines, those long lines at our schools. on getting our students dropped off. So that's a consideration. But we do know that, and also siblings, we'd have to make sure that we keep all of the siblings and their schedules on the same line so that parents aren't driving constantly. So that was what we came up with the AM PM, but for the block schedule, there's a little bit of consideration. So the stakeholders said that there's advantages to the block schedule, which include that it's what we're doing right now in remote learning. So that would allow for some consistencies, and it would allow students to keep their schedules and teachers to keep their schedules. But the thing that we do need to remember is that versus going every day in a block schedule, you'd have less contact with students because it would be seeing 3 groups of students a day, and students would see 3 teachers a day and different students in their classes. And if we went to an everyday Covington campus, that would be 6 interactions. So it would double the interactions. So that's the advantages of a block. But there's concerns for our middle school students because that's a long time for them to sustain their learning and their listening. And there's a lot going on in the brain development of our middle school students that we need to pay attention to, making sure that they get the quality of education that they deserve. So things aren't perfect with the AM PM or perfect with the block scheduling, but those were some of the things that came up in the discussions that I was able to here during the time that we did the work that in our collaborative groups. So I'm going to turn it over to Bridget Pelly. She is the parent that is going to be doing the final sharing of our group. Thank you.
Thanks, Anne. I appreciate it. And again, my name is Bridget Pelly. I've been a parent in our district since 2003. I have an older child that graduated from Monte Vista in 2017 and is now a senior at Colorado State. And I currently have a junior at Monte Vista. I'm going to be covering a couple that we didn't have complete consensus, but really had some great conversations and a lot of thoughtful discussion around. So let me start with more discussion here on the asynchronous time. So asynchronous time should look different depending on the grade level in a hybrid model. There's still a lot of questions around what this would look like. Families like the amount of teacher interaction they're receiving now and would not like to see it reduced. Also, we need the information on how it will look in order for families to make an informed decision when we do have to make that declaration. We need to consider all different types of family circumstances. Single parents, parents working outside the home, some parents who are still working remote, such as myself. So we need to put that into the thought process. We need to structure time to meet the diverse needs of our student. How it looks for a kindergarten student would be different from a 3rd or 4th grade student. How it will look for a middle schooler is far different than how it will look for a high school junior taking AP classes. So that needs to really be taken into consideration with asynchronous learning. Using some type of transitional model or pilot program like previously addressed, the group felt that this would allow us to gather the appropriate feedback on a proposed hybrid model and ensure they're working as designed. Otherwise, improve or refine as needed before we bring the general student population back onto campus. As Anne said, you know, we don't want to be building the plane while we're flying it. We want to make sure that we are thoughtful and deliberate and measured as we roll this out. Next step is around further evidence. So further evidence needs to be collected and considered before we make a final decision about how we transfer to hybrid instruction, what will work for our students from both an academic as well as an SEL perspective. There's many questions that remain about how different a physical return to school will look like. And Jose touched upon this. The safety protocols, how we're interacting with our teachers and staff and the classmates. You know, we need to work this out and effectively communicate it to everyone in our community. Considering our current environment and not knowing what the future holds, most stakeholders agree that moving to hybrid is beneficial in order to get our kids back on campus and in some sort of normalcy. From the meetings, it also seemed that most would be willing to stay on distance learning through January so that we can formalize that strong hybrid model like we discussed. but with an understanding that number one, after school student support programs are put into effect. Number two, we're triaging the student groups by a need for return to campus. So example, our special needs community, then our lower elementary level, higher elementary level, middle, and then rolling into high school. We also want to move forward with the implementation of a pilot program to test the proposed hybrid model. Lastly, there are districts and schools that are utilizing our proposed hybrid model. However, Mr. Jewett at the last meeting had talked about, he was concerned about touch points. There are other hybrid models that are being implemented that do in fact increase the number of touch points. There's the 3-2 model where group A is going to school 3 days a week in person, and the group B would attend 2 days a week in person. Then it would flip the following week. There's also the continual A-B rotation, which would basically remove the common learning day and be more of a serpentine, a constant A-B rotation. It would benefit us to study and learn how these groups have implemented their hybrid models. And we need to look not at just random districts or schools. We really need to look at comprehensive school districts that with similar size as ours. We need to understand the benefits and the drawbacks that they are seeing as they implement this and build off of that. Again, we want to make this thoughtful and deliberate and measured. We don't want to continually have to upend the apple cart in order to make sure that our students are getting what they need. Thank you so much. And again, just to echo what everyone said, this was such a great opportunity, and I appreciate the invitation from Dr. Ahern as well as our district leadership to participate. The group was incredibly collaborative and respectful and thoughtful, and everyone's voices were heard. And I think that just in how we laid out what we gathered from the meetings really shows that. So again, thank you, and I look forward to continuing to work with you. Debbie, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Bridget, so much. And thank you so much to all of our speakers. It's not always easy for people to come and talk at a Board of Education meeting, and you all did a wonderful job. And so thank you, and thank you for spending countless hours talking to us about this. Our goal really is to continue to have these types of discussions with our key stakeholders throughout the next few weeks and the next few months as we continue to make decisions about these things. We definitely want to hear from all of you, not just in a survey form, but also in a qualitative form, because those discussions were really, really amazing. But I did just want to reiterate that the themes that we just talked about weren't necessarily unanimous, even in our groups that we had, but we wanted to provide you again some context around the discussions that we had around those themes. So thank you again for everyone who participated, and especially the 4 that came to present here tonight. So thank you. And I will now turn it over to Dr. Freitas to talk about special education.
Thank you, Dr. Pettish. So about a week and a half ago, we surveyed all of our special day class parents in the district, and we received a great response from them overall. About 80% of our parents responded in total. And of that, what we found were there were 3 key questions we were looking at. About 62% of them responded that they do want their child to return to in-person learning in October or November of this year. About 37% of them stated that at this time they would remain in remote learning, but when we get to the declaration phase, when it has to be something more formal, they might change their mind at this time. In addition to that, what we found out was that in regards to those students who were eligible for transportation, 47% of our parents said yes, they would participate in district transportation, but that the other parents at this time would be transporting their students on their own at this time. Again, maybe changing their mind later in the school year, but not to start, and would seek reimbursement through that model. In addition to that, what we've done over the last 2 weeks is really looked at evaluating the schedule that we would bring our students back into. Knowing that our general education peers might not return at the same time, what's really been decided after consulting with many different groups is that we want to keep our schedule the same as it is currently in hybrid for those students who return in person. And the importance of that is because then they can continue to mainstream with their peers through a virtual model. And so even though many students might return in person, mainstreaming would still take place in that classroom setting, but through a virtual model with their device at their desk or in another room under supervision. In addition to that, what we've decided is that with students returning, we would be returning students in person Tuesday through Friday, assuming we continue to stay in the red phase, and that on Mondays, all learning, those who are returning in person or not, would be done in a virtual model. So Monday would be virtual, Tuesday through Friday would be in person. Lastly, I just want to thank all the parents and the staff who did respond. Myself, individually, I've received over 400 emails or phone calls. I have been able to return most of those. In addition, my staff, my program supervisors, my directors have received several from their school sites that they serve and helping out to respond to those that I had. Staff have done a phenomenal job sharing concerns, sharing ideas about how to return, and/or concerns that they have about doing so and trying to get clarity from us and making sure we keep certain things under consideration. So again, the response rate from our parents through the surveys and outside and our staff has really appreciated and really helped us as we're working with our peers in determining how to best do this and serve our students. And I'm going to go ahead and pass to our Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources, Keith Rajinski.
Thank you, Marianne. So I'm going to talk for a moment about negotiations with our labor partners. We've had discussions and negotiations for the reopening of schools to on-campus, in-person learning for actually the past several weeks. They are underway with all three of our bargaining units, CSEA, SEIU, and SRVUSD. Just to give you some context, we have had a total of 8 negotiation sessions since last Monday. We have 2 more bargaining sessions that are scheduled simultaneously tomorrow afternoon. So that's a total of 10 in the last 8 school days. So clearly our district and our union team members are very heavily invested in this process. Our negotiations are expanding primarily on what was negotiated back in the summertime for full remote instruction. And what we're focusing on there primarily are terms and conditions of employment that are specific to on-campus, in-person learning, as opposed to remote learning in the current environment in which we're working. Good progress, really good progress has been made to date. We've had really positive, productive, creative, and solution-focused discussions with just a lot of really healthy interaction and engagement with members of the district's management team and the district's union teams. Very healthy discussions. Our goal is to have all of our negotiations completed. Declarations from families are required. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Malloy to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Keith. And now we are at the final stages. You've heard about the quantitative data of our survey, and we will place this data onto our reopening website so that you can see it. You've heard about the qualitative data from our working groups. There is a consistency to the data that you're going to hear about now as I communicate the proposal. There is quite a bit of professional expertise that has gone into this, including my own team's thinking amongst many, many hours. And of course, if I can turn the slide just for a moment back to the guiding principles, because you heard very much, if I can just have the next slide, please. Thanks. You've heard about health and safety throughout. We're committed to it. We've worked hard on it. Our planning guide has clarified it, and we have more work that we're continuing. You've heard about the importance of instruction and learning, and we know about minimizing disruptions. We understand that we have to support teachers to be effective in the next model, just like we were supportive to all of our staff in the previous model, which is why, though it has not worked for all, we've received tremendous feedback from many. And you've heard also that we've got to figure this hybrid piece out. Jumping into the schedules tonight doesn't make sense from our perspective because there's a few guiding principles that still have to be worked out. What we know is that where practicable, we need 16 kids in a class. And we need to basically plan with that in mind. How we do that, to strengthen teacher contacts, staff contacts, connections between classmates, and the culture of the school, that part still does need a little bit of work, because to simply go A day, B day, AM, PM, block or no block, the data said we're not there yet. And we heard today from a student who said, can you please start with us and let our voices actually drive some of that as well? Something that we did do, but because we used the student's number for their survey, and we wanted our families to consult and collaborate with their students, which I trust it only allowed us to get a blended voice as it relates to this information, because obviously, as I said, we were able to align each survey with our students. You're hearing about the stakeholder feedback, you're hearing about the negotiations, and you're hearing about the statutes. So if we can turn to the next slide, our proposal is the following, that we would phase in, subject to negotiations and consultations, our special day class programs. You see October 27th, phase 1, intensive preschool and counseling enrich programs, and November 17th, phase 2, mild, moderate infants and adult transition. The reason those are Tuesdays, because in this schedule, there'd be 4 days a week on campus, which is why we wanted to start on the Tuesdays, because the Monday is the day that students would be studying remotely. In this model, we are proposing that all TK to 12 students return to school on January 5th, 2021. That is also a Tuesday, because, forgive me if I may add, Keith Rogensky, there's a special day and I'm still learning the language on the 4th, which is?
It's a floating teacher workday.
Thank you. And I'm still learning all of those important nuances. Though I want to be very upfront to say that our team, and I hope you can see it in the work that you've been listening to, has been focusing on a return to school plan. We haven't actually spent the same amount of time thinking about the specialized small groups and how we might bring students to campus between now and January and beyond for those more social, emotional, socialization, intervention, and support type activities. Again, this is something that we believe does need to happen, because what we've heard from some of our families is that they want their same teacher. They're not actually as concerned about remote or in class, but they really want their kids back on campus in some way. Again, to be clear, we've started the thinking, but that has not been where our energy has gone. We're also proposing to the board that we move the declaration dates to the week of November 13th to 20th. That gives a full week. That gives a weekend, which we've heard from some of our families is important. That gives an ample amount of time for us to finish some of the work that is required so that we can fully paint the picture for our families before they have to make a choice. Some have said, well, why haven't you actually painted that picture already? And I'm going to answer that question in this way. Again, as much as we wish we could do many things at one time, the focus since our board's decisions in the summertime, coupled with the state's direction at the same time, was to focus on remote learning. And I think that that is the reason why, again, for many, this has been an effective experience, a surprise to some, and we're grateful for our staff to the heavy lifting. But there's a lot of what we'll call the chicken and egg discussions here. People are looking for certain information before they can make a decision, and that information can only come when we engage in certain stakeholder collaborations and negotiations. And though I hope you're hearing that all of those things are positive, because of the diverse views in our community, it just makes things a bit more challenging. If I can go to the last slide. Just to say we're proposing something, it's not okay without an absolutely specific plan. And some have been concerned that if we waited for the majority of our students to January, might that cause an inability to reopen should we actually move as a county back into purple? I reached out to the county public health officers on that account, and I did receive an email back that when the plan is in progress, if we were to move to purple, we would have to return to a very specific testing regimen, but that we would be permitted to continue our reopening. I want to state that because that's an email that many of you have asked of me. Or a piece of information you have asked of me. I have got that email in writing that we would be able to continue our plan. So our plan includes the implementation of the health and safety guidelines that are already listed in our planning guide, with actually more information to come based upon your questions. The notion of providing support and professional development to the instructional model means diving deeply into this hybrid discussion that I've shared. Implementing special day programs, as you have just heard, is probably the most front and center and most important piece of our work due to where it falls in the calendar. Finalizing school site operations means that even though we have a system plan, we will be applying that plan to each of our 35 sites, and on our website there will actually be a specific a specific plan for every site outlining how school students would approach the building, leave the building, go to lunch, go to recess, how all of that would work specific to that particular site plan. As Keith mentioned, we would finalize all MOUs and complete negotiations prior to declarations in November, because without that, it's more difficult to paint the picture of exactly what parents are agreeing to. You will probably note then that depending upon what parents and students decide, it may mean some shifting to schedules and assignments. And that again would be the work of December, which also includes our human resources staff engaging our staff on how we will proceed, as well as our trying to minimize the interruptions and disruptions, as I stated, but that unfortunately may not always be the case. I'm going to close my thoughts by saying this, and then we'll be ready for all of your questions as you dialogue about this board, because in my many years of being a superintendent, though new here, I can honestly say as I started that I've not ever remembered something this complex and something this challenging, because of the deep, important emotions and reactions that our real strong engagement of all stakeholders provides to this situation. And I understand 5 days a week of in-person instruction is what we all want. And I understand that some sense of normalcy is what we all agree to. And I also can state very clearly from everything I've heard, read, and seen that we all want what is best for our children. The whole notion of teacher relationships, staff relationships, and consistency and stability is also key. And so when you, our public, our families, our communities are sharing your perspective with us, I can honestly say that the following reflections continue to keep me up at night, and I'm sure many of our board members would stay the same. Wanting to return 5 days a week and being frustrated that that's not an option right now. Wanting to return regardless and not sure why that can't happen now. Wanting to return but keep my teacher in class, which may or may not be the case. Not being sure, needing more time. Health and safety concerns, needing more information because of people in our homes that might have compromising circumstances. Wanting to remain remote, but wanting to remain remote with the same schedule, the same teacher, and the same structure. Wanting to come back, but not sure about hybrid. I'm open to anything, but I'm just not sure my family can deal with the disruption right now. We just got used to this. I'm not capturing all the emotions, but I'm closing with this because I want to share with you, our board, and our community, we get all this. And if there was a way to meet all of these needs, I promise you it would be on the table in front of you. There will be disappointment should you choose this schedule. There will be happiness from some if you choose this proposal. But all that I can say as I close our portion is thanks to our families, our stakeholders, our staff, our district admin team, who frankly, it has been a pretty intense time for us together to bring this to you today. And I just know that we can do this together, even if it means it's not exactly as everyone had hoped. But I hope that at least people can resonate with all of the different experiences that our community has so explicitly shared with us while we deliberate with what your choices need to be. So President Marvel, I'm going to turn it back over to you, and I'm thanking you for your patience. I know this was long, but unfortunately I started with it's complex. And if we don't give all the information, I don't exactly know how we would move forward. So over to you.
Thank you. No, you're absolutely right. This is the single most complex and most difficult decision that we as a board are going to have to make. And frankly, it's the most impactful. The passions that you've seen and the thousands of emails that we've gotten, that's because the parents recognize, we all recognize, the decisions that we're making are having a profound effect on each individual child in this district. Before we get into questions from board, are there any comments that we received from the audience on this particular topic?
Yes, President Marvel, we received 24 public comments, 7 of which did not want to be read, so I will read the balance at this time.
Can we summarize the other almost 17? Because we could be here for another hour.
Yes, I will do my best. Essentially, we have several that are making, several individuals who are making points that were covered in the presentation about hybrid options and getting SDC students back on campus. They want to ensure that it's happening when it is only safe to do so. We also have a couple of comments about why our district isn't following suit and following suit of other districts our size by declaring the rest of the school year fully remote, that would be more appropriate for elementary aged students. There was some additional concepts about the choice between remote being not a good choice when compared to being in person, and that it seemed as though there was a misunderstanding, or there was confusion, I should say, around if you chose to stay remote, you might have to pick a different school for the rest of the school year, and a different teacher, and asking the board to only consider approving a plan that supports all students. There was also a couple of comments about how some people in the community are telling staff members, particularly teachers, if they're worried about their personal safety, they should teach remotely or find another job. Those are quotes. And this particular person was saying that they were concerned about a situation where someone would have to change their profession. Isn't there another option that would help them? We do also have several comments here from district employees who are office managers, and they are all echoing a similar concern from our CSEA bargaining unit, including President Tammy Castelluccio, having concerns around the designation of a COVID sick room on campus as part of our reopening plan, where that will be located, who will be asked to staff it, and just a general kind of concern around that we hear a lot about what the teachers need, but that CSEA employees are left out of that conversation from their perspective pretty consistently. Those are the themes from the 17 public comments.
Thank you so much. So board, what I'd like to suggest we do is, before we get into discussion and debate about whether we agree, want to modify, will reject staff's comment, suggestions, whatever, let's go through any questions that any of us might have that might help inform the rest of us on what position we want to take on staff's recommendation. So let's start with questions first. Does anybody have a question or a clarification they'd like on the presentation that was received from staff? Susanna.
Hi. So Dr. Malloy, I know, and you had stated that because, right, that your team has spent so much time with regards to studying reopening plans, and getting our remote learning strong, that you haven't really had time to look at these small groups, right? The smaller specialized groups that could enhance socialization and social emotional outside of school. If this plan was adopted so that you have a little bit more time, do you think those small groups could start maybe in October, early November? Do you have any kind of sense of that?
Thanks for the question. I think the best way to answer it is we've had some preliminary discussions, not fulsome enough for me to actually bring clarity to you, but depending upon the direction of the board, that will allow us to readjust our time and get certain leaders, both at school level and at the district office, working on that so that we could bring an update to you very shortly. Right now, to be frank, other than having really some preliminary discussions, there hasn't been any depth to it so that I could basically provide information. I don't like to put out information that hasn't yet been tested. So I could leave it to say that we would do our very best to regroup if that was your direction, and then bring forward information as soon as we could.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on that issue or topic? Just want to see if I want to close that before going to anything else. So I have a question then, since I don't see anybody else raising their hand. So all of this related to the small groups, what we're talking about are the most vulnerable of the kids that we have in the district, our special needs kids primarily. Have you begun negotiations with the respective stakeholder groups about the impacts of any decision? Has that started? I know there's the issue of negotiations of going hybrid, but what about small group?
So I would answer that by just sharing, President Marvel, that our discussions have focused primarily on the reintroduction of on-campus learning for students. We haven't parsed out and separated discussions around what was up until today, yesterday, the waiver process, or small specialized groups, or moving into kind of a hybrid type of environment. We've been following the data, tracking the data, and we were expecting that we were going to be transitioning on into the kind of the red zone, from the purple to the red zone. But really, our discussions more than anything else have focused on what protocols, processes, plans, procedures do we need to have in place for on-site instruction
for small groups,
irrespective of size of groups. So we've talked about the parameters for all three of those, but we're looking right now at again, the reintroduction of on-campus learning for students. That's the general context in which the discussions are taking place.
If I can add a clarification, I think President Marvel, you might be thinking about before we moved from purple to red, which the assistant superintendent mentioned, we were talking about special education under the small group guidance definitions. Because we were predicting the movement to red, we've actually been focusing on returning, as you heard today, which isn't under that small group guidance. So we do need to revisit this, and then we need to bring that to the negotiating table because we know that it's good for kids, but we're not necessarily just talking about students with special education needs now. We're talking about all students, and realizing again that we can build upon some practices that are already happening. If you remember from the slides, the last meeting, we're talking about after school, we're talking about volunteers, we're talking about social as one strategy, like when we have conditioning for athletics. And then we may, depending upon how things emerge, move it into other things. But I think we could be able to speak more completely after we hear your direction regarding the reopening plan, take it back, figure out how to be really strategic regarding the small group plan, and bring that back to you.
Got it. But what I heard you say earlier is if we do not have small group going, so let's say this majority of this board votes to start January 5th. And in the meantime, we go from red back to purple. If we haven't started small group instruction, then we will not be allowed to do hybrid in January.
No, let me clarify, President Marvel. It has nothing to do with small group instruction. We are planning to start our regular special day class programming. So we would be open to students officially under red should we be successful with that implementation, and that is our commitment.
So the
So that
in
is-
person, in person.
we have, as I said in the slides, because I do want to say, if I may take this liberty, because I'm starting to receive the emails, it's always important to note the small print, because the small print I'm making large print. We still have some consultation and negotiation to do, but our commitment is that we will be open for our special day classes starting at the end of October. And when that is happening, our reopening plan has begun. So it's not based upon anything to do with small group guidance. The opening begins with our special day class programming.
But what it does is it gives us the safeguard that if we go back into the purple, we're not forced to go back to full distance.
And as I mentioned, thank you for the question. So I can confirm, I did ask the question. I've received the response in writing from Public Health, which states that as long, and I'm quoting it, as long as our reopening plan has begun, then we wouldn't be asked to return. And our reopening plan is when students start coming back on campus in person, and our SDC programming would start, of course, all things being equal, end of the month.
Got it. I think it's important people understood that. Okay, any other questions on this topic before we ask any other questions?
Yeah,
Because there's a whole.
I'm sorry.
Mark, go ahead.
Didn't raise my hand. Just to make sure I'm clear on this, because if we go back to purple, that's a state tiering system, and that says schools are closed. I thought the county could only impose stronger restrictions. They couldn't allow softer restrictions. Meaning, if we go back to purple, schools are closed by order of the state. How does a county have authority to allow us to continue our reopening plan?
As I understand it, if the governor were to direct us to be closed, it wouldn't be under the purple tier after a county has already moved to the red tier. If the governor or someone at California Public Health decides we need to close, then I'm sure we would get a different direction, but it wouldn't be within the purple red tier system as I've understood it.
Okay. Mark, any other questions?
Not on this thread. I have.
Okay. Go ahead and start another thread. I think we're over this one, unless anybody else has a question.
Just wanted to very quickly return.
I think Rachel had a question.
I'm sorry, Rachel had a question. Yes.
So it relates to kids with high needs beyond our SDC populations, such as our students who receive resource services, our English language learners. Dr. Malloy, am I understanding you correctly that if we successfully were able to bring our SDC students back, the next focus area would be other groups of high needs students, in addition to the social emotional small group, potentially after school piece that could be considered? We could also consider bringing English language learners and resource students back for some kind of in-person intervention. Is that accurate?
No, not exactly. So I'm grateful for the question. I think we need to keep in mind exactly what the calendar looks like and not to overpromise and underdeliver. If we can do the heavy lifting to get, and we plan to, so let me say when we do the heavy lifting to get our SDC programs back, that will take all hands on deck to get there, and we're going to do that. When we've talked about specialized small group, we've talked about that in an after-school capacity related to volunteers and such, and we would want to prioritize like you just mentioned. But again, as I said to Suzanne Ordway, we haven't done enough thinking about that yet. So it really is premature for me to go much further. If we were going to start talking about in the school day in-person work, we're suggesting that that doesn't begin until January, because again, we now know the kind of heavy lifting we're speaking about. And yet, under the small group guidance, after school, with volunteer staff, where we will work with our union groups to see if there's any aspects of that need to be negotiated, we could take that back and ensure that we bring information to you as soon as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Ken, you had a question?
Not on this topic. So
Okay,
Mark, I think you had some things you wanted to ask first.
Yep.
And
Go ahead, Mark.
Just some real quick clarification on the 5 days full time. We received a couple of emails. Where exactly does the 16 as practical come from?
So it comes from both state guidance, and the best way you can find it is on the Contra Costa Health website, where we posted it last meeting, and it's there, and you can see it in also our last presentation, where it gives you opening in purple, and then it gives you opening under small group, and then it gives you opening in red, and that's where you're going to see cohorts, small and stable cohorts where practicable. And then it's in another guidance. There's literally multiple volumes that you can read where they actually define that as 16 adults. So unfortunately, not all of it falls in the same place. And when we're doing our work, we're usually having multiple guides there. I go back to the Contra Costa Health website to get that definition. And then of course, those are the definitions we bring to our weekly meetings. And that's where we ask explicit questions. And again, there is some wiggle room, but not a wiggle room for 5 days a week. And since I'm answering the question, some people say, well, if a lot of people want to be remote, well, then we will be under 15. The challenge there is the staffing question again. Everyone who moves towards, who wants to stay remote, we need staff for. And we are staffed right now by the number of students we have. And so it's not about all those kids who may not be in your classroom still need to be taught. And that may be, again, when we have to deal with staff being sometimes moved to remote, sometimes moved to hybrid because of how the numbers fall, which is again, another one of those chicken and egg challenges that we're facing. But that's why we can't just, well, if 10 kids don't want to be there, that means 15, so let my kid be there 5 days a week. Well, again, I'm going to be as direct as I can. We may have to collapse a class to make a full class in a hybrid so we can also staff all the kids who wish to be in remote. And I hope that that was clear, because I think I've answered that question repeatedly, because people think that they could just stay in that class 5 days a week with a smaller number, but it becomes a staffing issue.
That was my follow-up question. So thank you.
Okay. Any other questions related to?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, just to carry that one little step further, because I know people are going to be asking this, is what is it, Dr. Malloy, you think it's going to take us to be able to go back to some semblance of normal, where we do get back to 5 days a week, all kids in the class? Because as we've now moved today into red, you know, a lot of people are already thinking, well, we should already be there. You know, and as much as we might go back to purple, 3 weeks from now, you know, the county could go to yellow. So, you know, what is your thinking around, you know, normalcy and when we might be able to look at that, assuming we have all of the safety aspects in place?
Thanks for the question. As I always say, the only reason I'm engaged in this topic is because I have the opportunity to go to many meetings with experts, but I'm not the expert of science and medicine. But I will say that when we speak about going back to normal, if normal means the 5 days a week, if normal means how we usually instruct with kids being close together and staff being connected in a physically tangible way, sharing things like math manipulatives and such, unfortunately, it would appear that that's still a little ways off. What would need to change for us to go back 5 days a week, at least in our California context, and I need to use this opportunity to say this because many wonderful families have emailed me about what other states are doing. And that's valid, but that's not California. And there are clear guidelines and directions here that until such time as we are no longer needing to distance, that's when we can fit 28 kids in a room. And the reason why that doesn't exist on the color tiers right now is because you may note, if you followed all of them, even if things open like gyms and indoor restaurants and such, the definition of distancing remains in all of those tiers. And that is the challenge we run into in schools. So we can become, I guess, to answer your question, more normal meaning what we're used to when we no longer have to physically distance. Obviously masks may be here longer until we have the vaccine. And of course, other things like hygiene, cleanliness and such, we can do anyway, and I don't see them as the same complexity.
Okay, questions on other, or any questions on any other aspects of the presentation? And I understand as we begin to debate, that may raise questions in our minds as well. Any other questions before we begin a discussion? Hearing none. All right, who would like to be?
President Marvel, before you begin your discussion, and I will turn my microphone off, just because I just took a glance at my emails, and I do want to make one last comment, if I may. I know that these meetings are intense because we've got so much information, and I understand that the information can become overload, and sometimes the nuances get lost. So I want to state that no matter what we communicate to you, our commitment is that we will deliver. Let me be explicit. If you recall in the last meeting, when we did speak about October 19th as a date, for example, to return, that was a date that clearly stated when we could return when you think about the discussion we had around that. We left that meeting stating very clearly that we had to do negotiations and consultations, and that we would bring those back to this meeting with the opportunity then for you to debate and dialogue with that information in mind. I just would like to say to our families who are feeling disappointed that I apologize if you thought a promise was made and a promise is broken. This is such a fluid and complex issue. I will always be as explicit as I can, and I'm going to be explicit again. You'll always see from us when it says subject to, with clarity around what it is that we're saying, because I know that sometimes people feel let down and frustrated. So I wanted to make that statement because even though there's a plan before you, we believe that that plan can be delivered upon, but I have to state as you do your debate and dialogue, there are still moving parts that are outside of our control, and that needs to be understood. It's not a lack of effort or a lack of commitment. It's not deceit or dishonesty. It's simply part of the realities we're working through. So thank you, President Marvel, for letting me have that last.
No problem. And it reminded me of a question I want to ask about the county waiver process, because you kind of slipped that in about the county rejecting our waiver. The two requirements, one we knew about pretty strongly about the issue of one teacher to one cohort, which made it frankly impossible for us to have a waiver approved if they stuck to that. The second one was an expectation. What I'm hearing you say is they would have, if we'd met the other criteria, they still would have denied the waiver because we would have had to have already committed potentially millions of dollars in contracts when we didn't even know if we were going to get a waiver, as opposed to what we did, which is if we get the waiver, then we'll initiate the contracts. Is that correct?
So thank you. So just to start by saying we were told our plan was excellent, which I appreciated. Yes, the cohort definition was problematic. And yes, there was an issue related to being under contract or not. You may know that there has since that time been a clear direction given to the state around testing. The whole world of testing is changing, meaning that access to testing through our benefits and such continues to be emerging. Those of us who work in schools are considered essential under the definition. So that whole testing world is shifting now. But to answer your question, it was raised to me in the email response that we weren't under contract, that was also an issue because being under contract is being in purple under the waiver, not so in red.
So they truly wanted us to contractually commit potentially millions without knowing whether or not we could exercise those contracts. In other words, we would have committed ourselves contractually to vendors when we didn't know whether we had the waiver or not. I don't understand how that makes sense from account, how anybody would think that that's okay. So the only conclusion I can reach is that the county had no intention of agreeing to a waiver anyway and set in preconditions that made it impossible for any reasonable school district to say, we'll only commit contractually once we have the waiver. We had them lined up, we just hadn't signed them to commit to potentially giving hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in contracts out. Is that what I'm understanding?
That is certainly what could have happened. That discussion didn't get to that level. So I really don't want to put words in their mouth, but they did say through writing that our testing contracts would need to be signed and our cohorts would need to be.
Well, the signed is it. Signed means you're committing to something. And even if you don't have, even if the county hasn't approved your waiver, they're saying we had to have committed and contractually obligated ourselves, and then they would maybe still not have approved our waiver. But it makes no sense. All right. It just tells us what their intention was all along, which was never to approve a waiver and set up a process that make it impossible for a waiver to be approved regardless. If any district was going to be fiscally reasonable, which of course we were. We didn't sign anything without having a commitment from the county that we could do it. Amazing. All right, so debate, folks. What do we want to do? Who would like to begin first? Rachel, were you raising your hand? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Oh, Ken, you're smiling. You get picked first.
Okay, I'll go ahead. First, I just want to thank staff and the committees and everyone, the parents who sent in survey information, the students, for all of the input that we've been receiving. I think it's been a very collaborative process, and I think it's brought out a lot of important comments as we try to define what the future should be. I really appreciate, Dr. Malloy, your final comments there about October 19th. My understanding at the time that was the soonest date that we would have been able to consider a hybrid solution, given either the waiver process having been approved, or if we had moved to red as of today, 2 weeks out, plus the next week till the Monday to bring us to the 19th. So, for me, the conversation that we had at our last meeting really opened my eyes to something I thought was really critical that's laid out with the plan that is being recommended to us. It might sound a little funny for me to say it this way, but, the movement from purple to red, the most black and white aspect of the movement from purple to red, to use too many colors, is that we're probably most prepared for the safety aspects, the things that people would be most concerned about, at least initially, in terms of the students and our staff coming back to school. Clearly, there's still some aspects that need to be worked out, and some of those have been discussed even in this meeting. However, that's what we were all talking about before the last meeting or up through the last meeting. I think that one of the key elements that really came out strongly, not that it wasn't being discussed before, but and something that really isn't discussed much at the county, even at the state level, and that is the academic aspect of opening up schools. We've looked at it from a safety perspective, and we believe strongly as a board and as a community, as administration, the school district, safety is number one. But right up there with there is the academic aspect in our district. And what we started hearing at that last meeting was the concern about, okay, now that we're in remote, the aspect of some students who either stayed in remote or moved into some form of hybrid would possibly lose their teacher or disrupt their educational process and consistency if we were to do something prior to at least the end of this semester. And I appreciate that clearly there's been a lot of discussion on this aspect in the last couple of weeks that I think have brought the administration through their recommendation to look at that aspect. Personally, I think that's the right thing to do. I have a lot of questions about what comes next. I think we have a lot of work to do still to make that hybrid successful. I think there's still a lot of work that we want to continue to do, tweaking our remote learning plan that accounts for, we're hearing that a lot is going well, but I know that we're also hearing about the troubles, not just social emotional, which we want to work on, but also educational aspects in individual classrooms that we want to make sure that we've really clarified through professional development and training and working with our students. So I think that all takes time. But I think that the initial aspect of potentially going to, some other type of format in the middle of this term, the semester, the fall semester, I think was clarified as not something that would necessarily be best for our kids. I'd also just like to state is I really feel for all of the families that are struggling with how to make this work remotely. I understand there's been a lot of work that families have had to do in terms of of job assignments and childcare and working with multiple kids in the family in terms of having the technology up and running, communicating with teachers and making sure that things are working well. Things from our teacher side in terms of how they've had to change their curriculum plans in order to be more successful in a remote environment. And I really appreciate all of that work. And I believe, though, that, you know, to continue to make this successful going forward through the rest of this semester and possibly longer for those who would stay on remote, we want to continue to make that the best it can possibly be, in addition to making a hybrid approach the best it can be as we bring that forward. And like I said, I'm personally in favor of January 5th as the starting date, and really focusing now on our SDC students and getting them back as soon as we can. And then additionally, seeing what we can do with some small group work for others to support health and mental wellness. And I'll just leave my comments at that for now.
Okay. Anybody else who'd like to be next? I'm going to pick on you, Mark.
Yeah, that's okay. Coming in, hopefully people can hear me. Coming in tonight, I was really focused in on what are the core issues? What are we solving for? And there were three main questions that I distilled this down into, because the fundamental principle is we all want kids back on campus. Nobody is in disagreement. We all want kids back on campus. How do we do it and when do we do it? And the three questions I boiled this down to is it safe? Does a hybrid learning environment provide adequate effectiveness or increased effectiveness over a remote learning environment? And the third question is disruption worth going to the hybrid model? Those are the three questions I've been struggling with all week. And I'll come back to the proposal in front of us. But the way I'm thinking about this, the first question, let's answer the first question, is it safe? Well, I look to the county and to the state to tell me if it's okay, public health-wise, to bring kids back on campus. We're in the red tier. Both the state of California and the county of Contra Costa are telling us it's okay, therefore safe, public health-wise, to bring kids back onto campus once we hit the second week of being in the red tier, correct? If the state and the county have determined that it's safe by allowing for the repopulation of our schools, with all the public health resources at their disposal, they're responsible, they're accountable, then the question I was answering myself is, then how do I say no? I don't think I can, to at least trying to figure out a way to offer the flexibility for have their kids on our campuses. As I said back on July, and in I think July 14th and June 23rd, the dates are now seared in my memory. There are no right answers. Each has downside risk. Students back on campus, there's risk. There's going to be a risk of virus spread. Students are not back on campus, there's a risk of learning loss, isolation effects, family economic and resource hardships. We talked about this. You read the minutes and listen to the audio from June 23rd and July 14th. Where I come down is on the question of safety, offering flexibility to return if families so choose, because no one currently in a position of authority and or accountability is telling us we can, or even that we should not, at this point seems like the right path forward. So let's find a path forward. Second question, is hybrid learning environment more effective addressing the whole child? The whole child. We always talk about educating the whole child than remote learning. Some questions I've been grappling with is reduced structure and synchronous learning that's going to come with the hybrid model under our current model, offset by reducing the social and emotional effects of isolation. In person, 2 to 3 days a week, and I'm looking at Christine, so by all means, make this a dialogue if you want to, and if I'm saying something you disagree with, because I want to be calibrated. In person, 2 to 3 days a week is not going to be normal. Far from it. Students won't be able to sit closely together in project teams. Students won't be able to socially congregate at lunch and in between class periods. Teachers are going to have to remain distant from students. One-on-one teaching is going to suffer as compared to a normal, however we want to find a normal environment. How do teachers engage in Socratic teaching methods or lead group discussions with face masks, discouraging these exact behaviors? It's not going to be normal. It's going to be a different environment. Will the hybrid model result in significant learning loss and risk to students with too much self-directed time as opposed to a full remote environment? One of the questions we've been thinking about is, and it's been in a number of emails, and I don't think we address it, but maybe we can at some point. So let's put a pin in it. Can we work a hybrid model with live streaming? There are certain opportunities and challenges that have been raised in the public forums around that. So maybe that's something we think about. Three main areas as I think about hybrid. Is it good for students versus a full remote environment? I have three main areas of concern with remote and distance learning. Distance learning is challenging. I have two kids, as everybody knows. It is a challenge. Being in your room, isolated, trying to learn in front of a computer by yourself on those Zoom meetings is challenging. I am a professional. I sit on Zoom meetings 7 to 8, sometimes 12, 14 hours a day myself. It is challenging. Even with regular class times on Zoom and check-ins and single technology platform for content delivery, students are challenged in content acquisition and retention. I see it in my kids. I've seen it in the classes that I've sat in. You cannot duplicate in-class experience of real-time two-way communication between student and teacher and between students. All the same personal challenges of distance learning remain: equity, personal availability, tech availability, accountability, etc. All the issues we've talked about. Isolation is creating environments for bad physical and emotional behaviors, leading to adverse physical and emotional consequences. Kids need to socialize to feel connected and part of schools. The Healthy Kids survey we do every year focuses in on engagement and connectivity. We cannot replicate that in the same way distance learning environment. It leads to disengagement and disconnection. We talked about it. That's why we have such an emphasis on social emotional aspects of the learning continuity plan. Families cannot continue to administer distance learning at home with efficacy. Not all families. Dual income parents, parents unequipped to teach, family situations at home, not fostering learning environments. As the economy opens up, parents are going back to work. This is putting strain on parents. So where I come out on the hybrid question is, I think offering a limited on-campus experience, even with the more limited opportunities for connections and structured synchronous instruction time, will be more important to our families and to our students to help offset all the social, economic, emotional issues associated with remote learning for many. First question, is it safe? Yes, we should find a path to bring kids back. Second, does hybrid work? In my opinion, hybrid is for certain families who so choose, not a mandate, so choose hybrid learning is far more important to offset the horrendous social emotional toll it's taken on kids and families. We try and find the alternative to offer. The third question is much more difficult for me. Is disruption worth it? This is something, I'll be very honest, and this is something I've learned since the last time we spoke, how potentially devastating this could be. I get it from the high school perspectives. I have two high school kids. Asking them to switch teachers in mid-syllabus in the middle of a semester with all the carnage that's going to create and how do their grades translate over to new teachers and new classes is kind of mind-bending for me. Also pointed out, there are some classes that are taught, I learned this word, singleton, single classes. What happens to those classes? Do they not get offered if a student and family chooses hybrid? Do they not get offered if they choose remote? Some things we got to think about. So at the high school level, I get it. What I've also learned, and I learned this firsthand, I made the investment last Friday to sit in all day. I think it was from 8 to about 1 or 1:30. Sat in all day on a first grade Zoom class. I saw the deep connection this particular wonderful teacher had with her kids, and the kids had with the teacher, and the kids had with other kids in the class. That really cemented the disruption. If offering the hybrid mid-semester is going to result in kids losing those connections, that's real. And I just want to make sure that I pointed that out and I validated it because I saw it. I don't have a good answer for that. It's a question. Two questions I have maybe for staff is, given the results of the survey, do we have any kind of idea how disruptive this might be to elementary kids? Are we talking severe? And when I'm talking about levels, and again, if it's speculation, just tell me if we can't divine from the data that we have. But are we talking hundreds and hundreds of kids given the data we have, are likely going to lose their teachers, and even more importantly and more dramatic, lose their school. They're going to have to go to a class taught by a teacher from a different school. That's going to disengage and disconnect parents. That's real. Do we have any kind of sense?
The reason why the question is hard to have a sense about is it is connected specifically to what do families want and how do those numbers fall? And kids aren't numbers. I'm not trying to say it that way, but that's where the staffing equation comes in. To be this specific, if we had 2 third grade classes or 2 third and fourth grade combined classes at a school where half the kids wanted to be remote and half the kids wanted to be hybrid, and we worked it out with the teachers that they team taught, that is a perfect example of probably nothing changes. But what happens if only 5 kids want to do hybrid or remote? Then we have to actually start to think through that. That's one idea. Another thing that you raised, which is, and again, I hope that you as the board and our community has heard this. We are asking wonderful educators to help us figure out, is there another way to do this? Because the way hybrid is defined is the every other day, or the way asynchronous is defined is as unstructured. Can we flip some of those definitions so that when we're actually at the implementation stage, we can be different than that? Right now, we don't have an answer to that. I think you framed it really, really well, Mark, in that, you know, I came 2 weeks ago and said, based upon the data, we weren't even in red yet. And in our community, I certainly said to you, if you wish to apply for a waiver, do so, because the safety question for me in the superintendent's chair is that it's safe. Not everybody believes that, but I certainly could say that. The challenge came when we started to hear from everyone around that. Some are concerned about safety, and I want to acknowledge that. I do believe as long as we follow the guidance, and that I won't budge on in this seat unless you directed me to do otherwise, which I doubt you would, which is, you know, the distancing, the masking, the cohorting, the cleanliness and hygiene. If we're doing that, then I truly believe coming back to school is safe. But then comes into all the nuances that you described. What does disruption mean for individual kids? What does disruption or change mean for individual families? What will hybrid actually be? We're trying to work through it, but it isn't defined yet. How can it help? Might it not help? And the only thing that was consistent, no matter who I spoke to, is that, again, this is a great, great reality to have. I want my teacher. I want my staff members. I want my para. Well, okay, that's great. So to answer your question, the disruption is as great as how the numbers fall, which is unfortunately why we can't state it clearer unless we can figure out a completely different way to do this. And by the way, I want to go on record as saying this. When we even talk about live streaming, how many people have commented that some of us are in this room with the camera far away and others are on the Zoom call and their face shows up? So that definition of live streaming doesn't work for every kid. Secondly, asking educators to be doing 2 things at once without parameters, not okay from an education perspective. But that doesn't mean there isn't something to be figured out there. As I said, teachers are writing to us saying, I've got some ideas, and we're going to be sure that that makes it to our negotiation table because all ideas are helpful. Families are writing with great ideas. So one family wrote to me, and I'm going to use this as an example. You know, we say that when you declare, you're going to have to stay for the rest of the year. And people said, well, why? Well, because anytime we'd have to disrupt again, if the numbers didn't fall correctly, we'd have to do another reshuffling. Someone gave a great suggestion. Well, maybe you create a wait list. And as there is opening. So we're open to all of these suggestions. I truly believe we've moved mountains in a short couple of months. There's a few more mountains to move. But what I'm sharing with you and the board is that those mountains, because people have been so engaged, are documented. And there's a plan to each of them. But that's why I can answer it. I can't answer it until we get the declarations and then we do the math and then we figure out how it falls.
Yeah, no, I get it. It's a little bit of an unfair question, but I thought I'd ask.
Well, based upon the survey, we had about roughly half, a little over half of our parent community that responded, right? 16,000 something.
It was 55% when you do the
There you go. Yeah. So what was the percentage? You had said it, and I apologize, I don't have it up on the screen. What was the percentage of people who said, I want to go back, but only if I can keep the same teacher? That there was a number there.
Danny Hillman, could you please offer that information, please?
Yes, I'm scrolling to it right now. For the parents, if I want to keep my same teacher was about 9.75%, 9.77.
9.77. And what was the
To
percentage?
clarify, that wasn't, I want to go back, but I want to keep my teacher. It was no preference. My priority is I want to keep my teacher.
Oh, yeah, I want the
Subtle
one where
difference.
yeah, there is a difference. What was the one? There was another one where they wanted to go back. They did have a preference. And they said, and I want to keep my teacher. I thought that was another subgroup.
Danny, why don't you just give the numbers again? And maybe we
Sure,
can.
I'd be happy to. So the number of people who said they wanted in-person hybrid learning in January was 20.74%. The number of families that said they wanted their child to return in hybrid learning as soon as possible was 31.76%. And the families that said they wanted to learn remotely for the remainder of the school year, 29.9%. The other number I just gave, which is remain remote or return, but they want to keep their teacher, 9.7%. And then we still had some people who were unsure, that's 7.8%.
President Marvel, if I could just finish by saying, in light of this data, in light of the plan to ensure that we could figure out hybrid, figure out how to make a return effective and strong for most, give some time to those who didn't want any changes to at least be able to plan for it, including our staff who we wish to support. That's where the January proposal came from, because it still looks like a greater portion of families would like to come back, all things being equal. And those who do not wish to or who are unsure, hope would be that we could figure out ways to mitigate against the interruption, because almost everybody who wants the remote program, who wrote to us or who spoke to us, wants it to stay the way it is for the most part. And so therein lies why we needed a little bit more time to figure out how to get as close as we can to meeting as many of the needs, realizing we can't please, unfortunately, all of the requests.
Okay. Mark, do you have any other questions or comments or positions?
Finish off my comments here is I also, disruption, we talk about kids and families. It's what we've heard. So I'm just going to, validate hearing it. We also heard that this is going to be a disruption to staff. They've made connections. They have spent hours and hours and hours trying to perfect a remote learning environment for their kids. And I understand that. As I said, I sat through that. I made the investment for a full day on a Friday to sit through the class, in addition to all the classes I've, watched sometimes with permission, sometimes without, for my own kids. I get it. There's connections there. Our teachers are working hard and they're doing the best they can, and it's great. And I love it. So I just want to acknowledge that disruption too. So is it safe? Yes. The people in authority with responsibility and accountability are telling us it's safe as long as we follow the protocols, masks, increased hygiene, sanitation, we get the ventilation right, and we get the social distancing right. They're telling us it's safe. So we should bring kids back. Hybrid model. Yes, for certain families, given the choice, that is going to work better for their kids, given their circumstances. I am very concerned with kids sitting in their rooms or in their dining rooms alone on a computer for 7 hours a day. It is not optimal by any means. The question for me boils down to, is it worth the disruption to try and accelerate this? But you may have answered it in your presentation, and I'm not going to hide my disappointment. My disappointment is not criticism. It's facing the reality with which I am presented. And that is a pandemic that is creating all kinds of complexity, and we have to try and do our best to get it right. I like the way Bridget Pelly, our parent spokesman, said we need to be thoughtful, deliberate, and measured. And I fully agree with that. We can't get it wrong, because switching from hybrid to something else is going to be more catastrophic than just switching to hybrid, or keeping it fully remote for a while. I didn't realize how complex this process is and how much time it takes. And I do understand it and I get it. I have talked to every single person in this room multiple times on multiple weekend days. I know you guys are working 7 hours a day because I'm working with you and I get it. And I understand it. I want to validate it. It's hard. Where I come down on this is, boy, it's going to take us more time to partner. I'm not going to use the word negotiate. I'm going to use the word partner with all of our labor groups to get this thing right, this hybrid model right. We heard it from students. We heard it from parents. We heard it from teachers. We got to get it right. It's going to take more time. I don't see how we rush into that if that's what we're hearing back from our community, coupled with the disruption. I think right now, I mean, if this is going to leak into November, why would we switch to hybrid in November when we just have a few weeks left in the semester anyway? So why don't we aim for the January switchover date? That's fine, but let's acknowledge we're kicking this disruption can down the road. There's still going to be disruption in January. It's just, is that a better time than now? And I think ultimately it is.
And we did say at the last meeting that we thought that from a grading academic connection perspective, it would be better. We also, and again, I want to say, people were so worried about remote learning when I got here in July, and our teachers and our staff members were working so hard to get it right. And again, it's been really amazing to see what's happened. We have a similar desire in October, November, and December to support the same kind of preparation for a hybrid model that could be more meaningful. And I'm still not going to close the door that we can come up with some way to really avoid interruption. It's not here yet, or I would say it, but I'm not wanting to close the door on that because there might be an educationally effective, socially, emotionally strong way of getting kids on campus more than just half days and still adhering to the rules, if you will, or also using technology in a way that allows for more contacts, but doesn't ask of our staff to do something more than they can do. I just would like the board's support to have a little bit more time to try to figure that out. But to be honest with our community, we may not be able to, and it may mean more of a disruption than we like. And that's when we think January would be best based upon all the things we've described. But I'm not willing to say it's impossible yet. We still want a little bit more time to try to figure it out.
And I appreciate that.
Okay. Any other questions or positions you'd like to take, Mark?
No, I think I took up, what, 5 hours there, so no more.
Okay, Rachel.
Okay. Mark, I really like how you laid it out into those categories. I will try to follow along with those same categories just to continuity of conversation. Related to safety, I think you said it very well that we need, that we feel confident. I feel confident. I feel confident with how Dr. Malloy has interrogated the information that he is getting from the county, probing, pushing, asking for clarification. I think for most of us, we can minimize exposure in our classrooms. I still am very sensitive to the families, whether they're our students' families or our staff members' families, classified and certificated, that have serious health concerns. And I do think whatever plans we roll out need to be accommodating for those employees. I know we have an interactive process, and I'm glad we have an interactive process, but I hope that we can be employee friendly in our execution of that process. Because it's tiered. We're going to have employees that are at risk, and then we're going to have employees that live with people who are at risk, and then more tiers to that about people in their bubble who are at risk. And at some point, people may have to make choices. But I certainly hope we don't have to ask employees to separate from their immediate families that they live with day to day. I think that is an unreasonable request. We have received a lot of email from families that are afraid to return, who have asked about ventilation and PPE and all of these kind of things. And I haven't seen a lot of specifics in our presentations about this, but they have been referred to in our guide to reopening. And I went through and read the current update of the guide to reopening last night. There is an immense amount of good information in there. So for the public who has those questions, please go read that document. I remember Danny reporting in the summer that investment had been made in the upgraded filtration system. So our ventilation systems are up to standard and then some.
And it's on our website.
Yes, it's in the reopening little box when you scroll down on the website. So yes, Mark, you're right. Staff has done, deep work and deep thinking, and they weren't sitting on their hands all summer. They have been doing tons and tons and tons of work to get us ready for this. I really appreciate seeing the survey data, seeing it laid out in the detail that it was laid out. It reflects the diversity of opinions that we are receiving in our email inboxes. What I find really amazing is when I read my email, it bounces boom, 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 different opinions. I mean, you sometimes wonder, are we all living in the same environment? And what it drives home is that we all perceive risk differently. We all interpret the news differently. We all receive different news. It's complex. And for the few people that have written to us that they don't understand what our problem is, why is this taking so long? This is simple. It is not simple. It is not simple at all. And I hope today's presentation showed that it's not simple, but if nothing else, the response of our community about how comfortable they are about when and how their kids return to school shows that it's not simple. I really hope that these numbers and the way they come out to almost half here and about a third there will present a creative solution that we can come up with in negotiations that can allow us to do this without disruption. The day after the last board meeting, I woke up just overwrought with the impact of what this disruption we were laying out for, because it was going to be take a class and carve it up, almost every class, carve it up. And then what about how the teacher of that class's needs are? And some ideas have been raised in emails, and I know staff is pursuing them. The work of the stakeholder group reiterates the complexity of this, but the thoughtfulness of this. And I really want to thank all those folks that gave their time last week to work on this work. And I really appreciated your presentation of the themes and the way members of the committee presented this to us. That was great. This isn't easy. And it just feels like no matter what we do, we're disappointing a whole bunch of people. And what this ends up being is a task of how do we do it the best we can? And as Dr. Malloy said, most people aren't going to get everything they want, but I think if we do this right, they can get most of the things they want, including avoiding disruption and some peace of mind in their home about the risk that they're subjecting themselves to. One thing I hope that if we pick January 5th, we can say January 5th, now let's get to work on that. And let's focus on teaching and learning. Not that our staff hasn't been focused on teaching and learning. I've sat through several classes myself and saw the excellent work. But what I mean is that our administrative team and these stakeholder groups can focus on executing the plan and not constant communication, defending ourselves, because this will be the plan. I think we have laid out a good course of action, and we've left some flexibility about what that hybrid would look like, and that's okay, because I think the more we work on it, the better it's going to be. There was one more thought that I had in there. Let me quickly hope it comes back. Anyway, it's gone. Maybe I'll get it back. Oh, social emotional clinical assurance. That's what it was. Several families have written to us with very emotional and often concerning concerns about their students' social emotional needs. Please do not sit on those. Please do not wait for school to fix those. As was talked about in the presentation, we have counselors, we have social workers, we have Discovery Counseling Center. We have lots of support in this community. Don't wait on that. Your students can ask for help, you can ask for help for them, but don't mess around with that, please, I ask you. That was my last comment.
Thank you. All right, Ken. Nope, you're muted. Oh, there you go.
I get to talk. No, Susanna hasn't had a turn yet. But since you called on me, Susanna, if you don't mind, I'll make one other quick comment. It has to do with, Mark, you had talked about, and I really do appreciate the way you laid it out. When you're talking about the remote learning and the concern about kids being in front of the screen for 7 hours a day, I absolutely agree that's an issue. But one of the things I think we're going to continue to need to work at as well in a hybrid approach is the asynchronous learning time, even under hybrid, when we're looking at 2 or 3 days a week, or half a day, if you went AM, PM, half a day for kids, with the potential of asynchronous without educator support, or what that educator support might look like. I think that's going to be a critical aspect of success, particularly at the elementary school level. At the high school level, quite frankly, there's even some positive opportunity for our students, particularly seniors, to recognize that hey, this is kind of the way that's going to be for you in college. Even if it's not remote learning, you're going to go to a class with a professor once or twice a week, and the rest of your learning is on your own, and you're going and listening to lectures or something of that nature. So not to sugarcoat what it's going to look like, but I think it's different for elementary school kids. We need to make sure that we've been able to address what that asynchronous learning in any kind of remote environment, whether it's hybrid or remote learning full-time, is going to be. So thank you for the extra time, Greg, but I think it's Susanna's turn.
Susanna?
Thanks. Hi. I mean, Ken, Rachel, and Mark have really identified a lot of things that that I was questioning too, right, and reading and stuff like that. I just want to also thank staff, district staff, and parents and teachers, all also, right, at the very beginning of the presentation, of actually working together to keep adjusting things for our students, even in remote, right? The remote learning, about the lunch, right? The same lunchtime, things that we can't just leave things that are, that are not working while we're working towards the future. So thank you for that, as well as, of course, all the work that's been going on round the clock from the district and our staff, both certificated and classified, and parents and students. Thank you for all that. I love the presentation, which brought in, right, all the different stakeholders, and always love the students, their voice. But to me, yes, we've all received so much email about difference, right, in terms of risk tolerance and what they feel and their perspectives, and their challenges and successes, but challenges too. But this time it seems to be kind of consistent with what the survey said, that not only, I want to be back in person or I want to stay remote. We also actually had some parents who reached out, who I think a lot of them said, oh, I've never emailed before or addressed. And they gave their perspective. And a lot of them were the ones that were maybe in the middle. They want to go back, but they're not sure. But the consistent, I'm using consistent because the consistent thread, a lot of those, all throughout the messages, was that they need their kids and they need consistency and stability in their schedules. Even, I think, a lot of parents who wrote us said, well, I want to go back in person, but keep my schedule, my kid's schedule, right? Because they've bonded with their teachers, they've bonded with their classmates, and that's what we want. I don't know, where they would fall in that survey, but anyway, that's what I heard. For me, a big concern of trying to do hybrid, right? I mean, a big reason to do hybrid was so that the students, especially elementary level, because they do need more high touch, it's a chance for them to be in school, kind of personal interactions with the teacher and their classmates. But they also need stability. So if going back in person this early and this quickly means that they're not able to get within certain area of their teacher or their classmates, and they're going to have another disruption, right? A duration of getting used to their schedules and new teacher and new classmates and stuff. Yeah, I agree with kind of like what Mark was questioning. Is that worth it? And that's why I want to ask, and I'm hoping that that maybe if we move to January start and have more time to work out, all the complexities of hybrid, because it is very complex, that perhaps our staff will also have time to bring us back not the small specialized groups, but it's really like more after school activities or opportunities for our students to do more socialization and for social emotional type things. So after school things. Of course, special education students and the other, small, more specialized needs groups should be, yes, their priority. And I know that we're working to bring them back in October. So that makes sense. They should come back as soon as we're able to have them back. And I'm glad end of October is a goal, a target date. But if we can also do some of the other, right, after school kind of social activity opportunities for our students in any level, maybe that would help with that big concern of why we need to go back in school, right? Again, not perfect. It's not five days a week full time, but that would go a long way, I think, with helping our students. And what actually our, I think Bridget Pelly, our spokesperson for the parents said, and I've heard this, right? We've heard this before, that our teachers were building the plane while they were flying it with kind of start a remote, especially in the spring, and that didn't quite work. Yes, we hope not to do that again. So I think given our district, our staff, our teachers, a little more time to build maybe not a perfect plane for hybrid, but at least part of the plane might go a lot further with our success in having our students come back in January. That's all I have.
Okay. So, Mark, I love the way you laid the three primary issues: safety, hybrid, and its effectiveness versus distance and disruption. I think it laid it out beautifully, because this whole problem is a perfect textbook example of how there is almost never one right answer and one wrong answer, one yes, one no. It's all different shades and all different conflicting imperatives. So if you solve the problem of safety, 100% safety, which means, frankly, we'll never be back in person ever again, right? If you go to the extreme, because someplace there will be somebody getting infected with COVID. So you have to balance the safety aspects to the mission of the organization, which is to educate kids. So that's just one graphic example of all the different conflicting imperatives. And you've heard me say it before, I'll say it again, we have to find that sweet spot. And we may all have different views of where that sweet spot is. I want to say to start off that staff has done a phenomenal job. I want to thank our administrators, I want to thank the superintendent and his staff. I want to thank the unions for coming forth and negotiating to the best of everybody's ability to try to work something out that's a whole new arena that we've never had, didn't think we were ever going to have to deal with. And everybody has concerns, and hopefully everybody has the kids' interests at heart as their number one thing, with all those conflicting imperatives that I've talked about. And we may all have different views. The unions may have different views about what their sweet spot is versus the board versus administration. But the fact that all the different stakeholders, parents, students, staff, classified teachers, administration, have all come together to try to work and how impressive it is. It's behind the scenes. Our parents don't see it. The thousands of emails that we've gotten haven't really seen what's been going on. And it's very intense discussions to try to find out what's right for the greatest number of people, the greatest good for the greatest number, which is, for me, always my sweet spot. So from an issue of hybrid effectiveness versus in-person, hybrid effectiveness versus distance learning, I also want to say staff's done a phenomenal job of implementing, I think, a highly effective distance learning experience. Much better than we did in the spring, obviously, but they need to be commended for basically doing a phenomenal job, putting many, many hours in, much more than they would normally have put in a normal in-person environment to try to make it work. Because nobody has 20 years experience doing distance learning instruction. Nobody, zippo. It's not like you could do it blindfolded because you've done it 20,000 times before. So the staff has done a phenomenal job. I want to give them credit where credit is due. However, studies have shown that in-person versus distance, in-person always wins in terms of the ultimate effectiveness. The wild card is hybrid, because hybrid is a mix of the two, obviously. So, but I still believe an effective hybrid experience would be better than an effective 100% distance. And I think that's where, if we look at the issue of where our parents came down in that survey, it's not their declaration yet, it's kind of what they know now, what they think. The biggest single group was get back as soon as possible into some form of in-person learning. I also want to point out to anybody listening, I can't tell you how many emails I got that said, well, that state has gone back 100%, 5 days a week, and that state's doing it, and that state's doing it. We're not those states. We're California. We have to go with what, as Dr. Malloy said, we got to do what the state law says. And right now, the state says, given the distance, given the social distancing required, normal in-person 28:30 to a class isn't going to happen at this point. I have a question about, and I'm sorry for not asking previously, what I heard was an AM PM model. Is that what is being suggested in K-5? As opposed to the Monday, Tuesday, or Monday, Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday model. The cohort would be an AM cohort and a PM cohort. Is that correct?
Not really. So thank you for the question. So I could
Okay,
clarify.
then I was confused. I'm sorry.
So what you're hearing is there's a preference that some have for that model. our parents, and we'll put this data all on our webpage, were split on this model. And our working group, collaborative working group discussions were also not in agreement on this model. So whether you're talking block, no block for high school, or whether you're talking AM, PM, or AB day, we need to do a little bit more work on that before we can actually confirm that that's the right thing to do, which is why we didn't bring to you tonight a lot of possible schedules that we could then spend a lot of time discussing, because there still needs to be a little bit more discussion on it. And one of the things that we said earlier in the presentation, especially with our older kids, 6th grade to 12th, we need to do more engagement of all of our students before we bring some insights back as well. So no, that hasn't been finalized yet in this scenario.
And I'd want to know, as a board member, what does the literature and the data show? So
part
to
of
the
the
best of our ability, given that we don't have 20 years of experience in the country showing this kind of a model, but I'm sure the educational experts in the country have probably laid out their views in various professional articles and journals about what they think is better.
Interestingly enough, we've actually done the scan, and the answer is that data doesn't exist yet. 5 days a week of effective instruction has been deeply studied.
Right.
Hybrid and effective instruction has not. Studies are beginning now, and as a person who dabbles in research, you have to work through a whole process to make that research effective. And right now there's a lot more speculation articles based upon first perspectives than there is any deep research. But what we can say is, whether we are remote or whether we are hybrid, there are some principles of effective instruction that we know our staff already uses. And because this is a unique environment, we can support strengthening. So there is a huge body of research regarding what effective assignments look like, what effective instructional programs look like, what small group dynamics that are effective look like. And we can build that into a remote space, and we can build that into a hybrid space. But in terms of any studies around A day, B day, AM, PM, that's actually potentially dependent upon the learner. But as I said, no research has been defined yet at this point with all the scanning we've done in the last 2 weeks. So I'm grateful to be able to answer that question, because we've actually done that work and haven't come up with the studies to share with you yet. But we will continue to follow that and be sure that anything we bring into this boardroom includes any evidence that is emerging in this field.
Right. Well, again, the problem with studies, of course, is that studies are based, peer-reviewed journals, they're based upon data, and there isn't sufficient data to really make an informed decision. What you have, so I guess let me rephrase the question. What I'd like to find out is there some sort of a consensus or trend among educational experts in the country, in North America, about which would be better, an AM/PM model cohort or a AB cohort where you do different days of the week, and understanding that those are opinions not based upon statistics or research, because you got to have data to reach conclusions, and there is no data. I would argue there is not sufficient data to reach an informed conclusion. So what we have to do is, based upon the educational experts, the pundits, if you will, in this arena, what are their views about what would be the best model for implementation, with the full understanding that data would be something that would have to come later because it's too early. But we don't want to wait. Let's wait 3 years to find out which is the best way to go. We can't wait that long. So you understand my point?
Yeah, so what we can scan is that from another angle, and we'll take this back, is there are different ways of looking at the question. So it may not be a question about A day, AB or AM, PM. It might be a question about instructional time, teacher contacts, peer connections, and then pull that data into a discussion around models. That I think we could probably find and glean some perspectives on, because I've actually read some on those perspectives. It's just not particularly on a hybrid model, but just looking at it from another angle. So we'll take that question back and be sure to add that to our work.
I appreciate that. So on the issue of disruption that Mark so eloquently pointed out, all of this is going to be disruptive, and I would absolutely agree that we want to. It's one of the influencers, one of those conflicting imperatives that we want to try to provide the least disruptive environment. But if you provide the least disruptive environment without understanding the impact on safety, as an example, or without understanding the impact on effectiveness in the classroom, they all are going to have, again, those conflicting imperatives. So we're going to disrupt kids in elementary. If we do the January start, we're going to be disrupting kids because elementary kids generally, there's exceptions to the rule always, but generally they've got that same teacher for the whole year. So if we do a January model, there is the possibility that that child's going to have a different teacher. And again, I want people to understand that are listening and watching. It isn't because we want to take that student away from the teacher that they've gotten to know and love, like, and have bonded with, if you will. It's that maybe that teacher is one of those that has, as Rachel had pointed out, it has a compromised immune system, or might be living with people who might. So for a variety of reasons, it would be appropriate for him or her to actually go back into a hybrid mode. They have to be completely distance learning. So in that instance, that child, if they've decided to be in person in a hybrid, they're not going to be able to have that teacher, very, very possibly. So, and all the other things that go in, the scores of different factors that go to try to make this puzzle come together in a way that makes sense organizationally and also makes sense financially. Because if money was no object, we wouldn't have to worry about it. If a student, if a teacher's group of students that she's been teaching with, only 3 of them decide to stay in person and the others are all distance, and she wants to stay in person, well, yeah, it's not a problem. That teacher would only have three students. And then we'll just hire some other teachers. Let's go hire some more. Well, we don't have that ability, obviously. So people, I got a lot of emails about just let them keep the same teacher. It doesn't work that way. You have to, it's a very complex set of puzzles that you have to put together. It's like a 10,000 piece puzzle that you're trying to put all together, and they got to fit just right in order to make it all work. So I understand that kids will, in January, at least in the elementary levels, are going to have potentially a different teacher if we wait till January, which then begs the question, if they're going to be disrupted, why not disrupt them earlier? What I can't get around, and looking at weighing the sweet spot, is there were just under 32% of people who said, I want to go back now. I want to go back as soon as possible. That was the largest single group among the 16,000 plus that responded. Was it every single parent who responded? No. And it wasn't because we lacked to try to get everybody to respond to the survey, and we only got a little over half. So, but that gives us some information, gives us an indication. What are the data points that we can look at? So I think we have to figure out a way to honor the largest single group that wanted to do something, that had a definitive opinion, and that was, I want to go back. And waiting until January doesn't honor that large group of people. And what I'd like to do is suggest, okay, I'm hearing October 19th is too soon because of all the complexities, and we're still in negotiations with the unions on the safety aspects and the effects. So maybe we do early November. Maybe we do the first week in November and have a start date, so that we honor the will of what the largest single group wanted us to do. Nobody, I mean, this would be a real easy thing if 80 or 90% of the people told us all the same thing. They didn't. The one thing about this very confusing situation is the fact that we don't have an overwhelming majority giving us their thoughts, all pointing in the same direction. But you have those that have made it very clear, 32%, I want to go back. I want to go back now. And to heck with the disruption, let's go back now. I'd be willing to say, let's go back now for the elementary. Again, with maybe a delay rather than October 19th, do something in early November. And delay the high school, because for obvious reasons, I think there is a serious disruption if you stop in high school. So semester break makes absolute sense. So I think you need a little more time. Let's give you more time. But I think giving you to January doesn't honor the wishes of the largest single group that gave us an idea of what they wanted. And then one more point, and then Rachel, and then yes. I have the same feeling about our special needs kids. I believe that our special needs kids have been most negatively affected by this whole pandemic and the way we've been trying to implement, to the best of our ability, some semblance of an educational program. And special needs students are just that. They have special needs, they have individual needs, and each one has unique requirements. And I would argue, based on talking with many, many, many special needs parents, we're not meeting them, not even coming close to meeting them. I think most parents are very pleased with our distance learning effort. I would argue, based on my comments and discussions that I've had and the emails I've received, we don't have a similar overwhelming positive view on special needs. But again, it varies from special need family to special need family because each kid has a special need, obviously. So I think we need to, and I saw your proposed dates, Dr. Malloy. I think we need to stick with those to the best of our ability, and we need to roll them out ASAP. Those kids need it more than anybody else. I cannot say it strongly enough. So Rachel, you had a comment or a question?
I just wanted to point out that the discussion of the numbers seems a little strange to me.
Okay.
The split between people who want to do hybrid right away and the people who want to remain remote are separated by less than 2 percentage points.
Correct.
If you add together both groups that do want to do hybrid, it adds to over 50%, which I think in my mind emphasizes what Mark said in his very first statement, which was we need to figure out a way to get the kids that want to go back to school, the parents who want their kids to go back to school. I do not think it differentiates the timing on how we do this, because our kids finish Thanksgiving and then we heard this when we had our calendar shift. They wrap up the semester, they take their finals, they have the winter break.
Yep.
I think separating them from their teachers and their classes right before their finals would cause immense stress in the high school kids. Now, I recognize that you pointed out the elementary here, but the disruption piece is more nuanced than just the teacher piece. The people writing to us about wanting to stay remote are saying, I like remote. Remote is really working for my child. And so the disruption affects them too. I think we have some good ideas, and I think we need to trust the negotiations process. Some of these ideas are coming from teachers. They're feeding them through their representatives in the union, and they're writing to us about them, which means they get sent to the Ed Services team. I think we can do this, but I think we need time to do it.
I'm trying to honor the needs of everybody, the best of our ability. And obviously some things are mutually exclusive. You cannot go back to any form of in-person that's a hybrid model without creating some disruption. It's going to happen. And so the teacher that those distance learning group have, that cohort in distance learning has, they may not have that teacher. You're right. You're absolutely right, because variety of reasons. You've got that teacher now has to be actually doing in-person, and they can't be doing full-time distance. So there is no one idea that's going to ultimately solve everybody's problem. Not one program. This is one of those problems where nothing we do is going to be satisfactory to 100% of the people. Not a darn thing we can do. And we just have to find, where we can, as many options as possible. So that's why I don't think anybody in this board is here. Yes, Suzanne, I got you. We'll be with you in a moment. I'm not suggesting in any way that we disrupt or that we not give distance learning advocates who want to stay, a pretty significant amount wanted to stay the rest of the year. And we need to honor that. Absolutely, we need to honor that. And nobody on this board is suggesting that we shouldn't. Staff isn't suggesting that. We're not going to do an either or. It's going to be, we're going to offer two different options when we ultimately get a choice. Susanna, you had a question or a comment or a reaction? Oh, you're muted, Susanna.
Oops, sorry.
There you go.
Someone
I'm sure you were very eloquent at the.
Yeah, that's right. No, I know someone has to be reminded to unmute themselves in our meeting. Anyway, I just want to actually give a perspective, a little pushback on the elementary, disruption or whatever. You are correct in that elementary usually, right, go for the whole year with one teacher. So there will be disruption, even, if we start in October, November, December, January. But I think that unless we've changed our calendar, if we change, right, and have the disruption before winter break, then I'm just imagining, and unless you have a different scenario, I'm just imagining that our student, let's say, finish out Friday class or whatever, and then, oh, on the next Tuesday, they have a new teacher and a new class. Whereas after winter break, when there's 2 weeks of break, it's almost like then the teacher, maybe the teacher they've been working with, can actually say goodbye and say, oh, you're going to, going to another teacher in class, but give some, encouraging words and stuff. And then 2 weeks break, right, with the family. So for a younger child, that's almost, because of their sense of time, it's different. Then they probably will, yes, they will know that I am starting anew. I'm just thinking that it's actually more disruptive if we start like right now and just have them change. That's what I see, unless.
To use the Band-Aid metaphor, you're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off at some time. The question is when.
Right, and I'm thinking that because we have the 2 weeks break, it's easier break.
Ken.
As I said, thank you. As I said earlier, I appreciate all the work that's gone into surveying and everything else, but I'd like you to keep in mind that the survey was not a declaration.
Right.
And we're talking about still having to do a declaration. I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and people are asking for more work to be done before they declared. So one of the things I'm hoping that we'll be able to see is for our second meeting in October, staff coming back to us with some firmer plans about what hybrid's going to look like, the whole scheduling thing. And I'm pointing out that date because the following meeting would be in the middle of what's been identified as potential declaration period. So I think we need to see more firmly what this program would look like for the January time period. And more importantly, what families and teachers would see in terms of what that would look like, so that they can make a definitive decision about what's best for them. We haven't heard that. We've gotten a sense, and that's helped some of the conversation going forward, but we haven't gotten that full declaration at this point. And I think that once we do, things like the level of disruption, the staying with your teacher, which we probably won't be able to answer for them then either, which is going to be an issue going forward as well. But I think there's still a lot more work that needs to be done. And this solution, in addition to looking at disruption, provides staff that extra time to make sure we're doing the best we can in giving the kids the best educational experience we can.
Do we have assurances, Dr. Malloy, that if this, because I'm not sensing that my fellow board members are gonna really be very supportive of my idea of maybe delaying a couple weeks. So I can read the tea leaves and the nods of the heads, the body language. So the question is, January 5th, do we have assurance that we can implement a hybrid model on January 5th? That's a separate issue from the special ed, because I'm still going to harp on that, but I'm talking about for regular instruction, January 5th. And what do we have to throw? If your answer is maybe, then what additional resources do we need to throw as a board at you to make sure that we can make that happen? Do we need more bodies, more administrators to help? We can pull in retirees if we need to. What do we have to do so that people can be assured, if this board says January 5th, that that is really a firm date?
So from staff's perspective and mine, it's a firm date with only one caveat that I suggested earlier. Most things are in our control, not everything is. And we need to continue to inform the board regarding how our work is going. So I just need to say that again, because as I said, I'm a person who likes to be absolutely transparent that we are driving to that date. This is a hard and fast plan. My team is looking at me because they even heard me this morning say, we're not actually going to shy away from it, but we're also collaborating with people who have very different views. And as I'm listening to you, I wrote these sentences down. Declaration needs the full picture.
Mm-hmm.
Full picture relies on negotiations and consultations leading to maybe a better creative solution than we have now, which helps the full picture. Whenever there is going to be movement, there may be disruption, as we've described, to teachers and schedules, which unfortunately many do not want, even if they want to go back to school or remain in remote. And we learned some things about starting in remote regarding if we support our staff properly, they can actually rise to brilliant occasions like we saw in August. But I'm giving you every ounce of confidence to that which is in our control, that we will open January 5th. What I can't predict, even though I've already said that I've got an email that suggests that if we start the reopening process, we can continue, and I trust public health on that. But when anything changes with this pandemic, if you're following other parts of the world, the whole psyche around it changes too. We're in a very different place now than I realized when I got here in July, but I talked to my colleagues regarding what was happening, and we can't predict January. But we can say, and this is where I'm going to be absolutely clear so I don't sound like I'm wiggling here, that we have some negotiating to do, we have some consulting to do. If I needed more human power, I will come to you, and we believe we can make the 5th. Similarly, we've created a much more adventurous schedule for our students in the special day class. We've got real heavy lifting to do this week in terms of negotiations and consultations, and we'll be bringing a report to you next week because we have another board meeting. So what I'm trying to say is we can drive toward a date, we're committed to that date, and we're in control of many aspects of getting there. But we may not be completely in control of all things, and that's the part that I simply will promise you regular updates, constant information, and regular communications to our community so that they understand exactly where we are and why. But I do want to say that all things being equal, it's a hard and fast date. It's not just a pie in the sky statement. And there's actually a critical path that is explicitly written to get there. We just gave you the Reader's Digest version on the last slide. But underneath that is our work plans to get us there in that time frame.
Okay, I have one question about live streaming. I received a whole bunch of emails, I think we all did, about live streaming. I think you had commented briefly about that. And I didn't hear a definitive, no, it won't work. I think what you said is teachers are coming up with different ways and ideas, and that's still part of the dialogue and the looking for, because obviously if you can live stream, there'll be less disruption, so that you could be doing both types of instruction simultaneously.
So people may hold different definitions of live stream, like they may hold different definitions of hybrid. Our goal is not just to provide students a space to learn, but we got to engage them. And we've got to figure out what that would look like from an engagement point of view, because it's one thing to engage kids when everyone's face is close. It's another thing to engage students on a screen when some of the faces, including the teacher, are far away. That doesn't mean that that's the only definition of live stream. That's what we're exploring. That's one. Two, and I want to say this to all of our staff members who might be listening. We get that you can't do the miracle of multiple things at once in a remote world and in a classroom world, especially if you're teaching younger kids. But again, there may be ways around that where we use technology for parts of the time and we figure out a way to help increase contact. That's part of the creative process we are engaged in, and I don't want to get in the way of it because I think that the brilliance that's already emerging might come up with better ideas than we even have right now. But all of this is on the table for discussion and negotiations. And as I said, we're relying on teachers and staff members in classrooms and schools to give us some of these important insights.
Good. Thank you. One final thing about employees at risk. I wanted to echo Rachel's comments that we want to make sure that every employee that's going to be interacting in this model is doing so in as reasonably a safe way as we can. And I say reasonable because let's be blunt. You can never protect 100% from every single risk that's potentially out there. You just can't. So what you can do is take reasonable measures to try to ensure, and particularly those employees that have their own set of possible weak points for the COVID to take advantage. Comorbidity issues, you've got issues at risk, family members, those kinds of things. We as a board, I think all unanimously believe that we want to do what we can to try to protect those employees where we reasonably can. Well, we want to be sensitive to that. And I know Keith and his staff in HR are going through the interactive process that the law requires for those that have submitted requests about it. So I just want to make sure the staff hearing this and the parents hearing it understand that there could be also changes in staffing because of the needs of that individual employee that we've acknowledged and we need to work with. All right. Any other comments or questions? I will need a motion, if there aren't any, to accept staff's recommendation as it has been presented. Rachel, comments or a motion?
I move approval to accept staff's recommendation as presented.
Okay, there is a motion, and Ken beat you to it, Susanna. Ken made the motion, unless you're making a comment, Ken.
Second.
Okay, there's a second. All right. Further comments or questions? This is probably the most important decisions we've ever made. So feel free if you have questions or comments to raise them now. This is the point. No, I'm not hearing anything from my fellow board members. I will just make one final comment. Although I think the majority, again, it was a survey. I think the majority will, I'm sorry, let me rephrase. The largest group that indicated a desire to go back as soon as possible. This motion isn't honoring their wish in one way, but I'm hoping the end result will be a much better experience because staff has more time to do the prep work to make sure that the hybrid experience is as impactful, as close as we can get to in-person learning, full in-person learning as we can. And I just wanted to make that clear. All right, any further comments or questions? Hearing none, I will call for the question. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed say no. The motion carries unanimously. That is the last thing that we have on our agenda. And unless there's anything else, any other board member wants to say, we are adjourned until next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. Thank you, everybody.